13-year-old Amy McNeil had her whole life ahead of her. But when she was kidnapped on her way to school, her future was in peril. The first call her terrified parents made was to the FBI. They hoped that the combined experience of agents and local law enforcement would flesh out the kidnappers before they took her life.
Wealth has its rewards, but it also brings its dangers. Kidnapping is one of them. No ordeal is more horrifying for a family than to have a child taken. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Kidnapping cases are among the most challenging for law enforcement, who often must remain out of sight, yet close at hand, ready to move in at a moment's notice.
About 20 miles south of Fort Worth, Texas, lies Alvarado, a small town in rural Johnson County. A few wealthy residents found Alvarado a safe haven away from the state's urban centers. The McNeils were among them. They lived as one of the area's most prominent families, partly from the return that Mr. McNeil made by selling an early design of the handheld calculator. At 7:15 a.m. on Friday, January 11th, 1985, they began their day having breakfast together, as was their usual routine.
Amy!
Afterwards, their teenage son would drive himself and his 13-year-old sister, Amy, to school.
Darling. Please be careful out there today. Come on, come on, come on. Bye, Amy.
On the way, Amy and her brothers stopped to pick up their cousin as well. He and his family lived in a separate house on the McNeil estate. At about 7:45, they were finally on their way to class. Then, from behind an abandoned truck, a sedan pulled out across the road, forcing the teenagers' Jeep off to the side. A gunman jumped out of the car and approached the Jeep. He demanded that Amy get into the sedan. The blonde-haired man warned her brother not to contact the authorities. He would call the family in a short while with his demands. Instinctively, the teenager started to get out to help his sister.
Leave and go home, boy!
But the kidnappers threatened to kill him and his sister if he tried to follow them. As they raced off with the 13-year-old, the teenagers couldn't make out the license plate. In a matter of seconds, the girl was gone. They turned around and sped home. The boys told the McNeils what had happened and repeated the kidnappers' warning not to contact the authorities.
They pulled us over and they had guns. And then if you told the police that they kill her.
Mr. McNeil ignored the demand and called the FBI field office in nearby Fort Worth.
Give me the FBI.
Former FBI Special Agent Clint Brown, a 30-year veteran, understood that when a kidnapping occurs, every second counts.
Hello, this is Clint Brown. I worked many kidnapping cases, and in not a single case did the subject get away with it. The number one goal in all cases like this is the safe return of the victim. All activities, all actions are all geared toward not doing anything to endanger the safety of the person who's been kidnapped.
The FBI's first task was to set up a recorder on the family's phone. By capturing the kidnapper's voice, they hoped to identify him or the place he was calling from. The FBI also informed the local phone company to be prepared to trace any incoming calls. Agents instructed the father on how to handle the call. He needed to insist on proof from the kidnappers that his daughter was still alive.
Expect a call to come in today. So you probably want to look for a
The fact that they had worn no disguises disturbed former Johnson County Sheriff Eddie Boggs, who called in the Texas Rangers moments after he arrived.
The kidnappers hadn't tried to conceal who they were at all. They just, as we call it, they just barefaced them, just no mask, no disguises, anything. That means there's not going to be a victim around telling who they are and what they look like. They're going to kill them.
Uncovering the kidnappers' identities might prevent that. Using an identikit that included hundreds of facial features, investigators worked with Amy's brother and cousin, building a composite of the man who held the shotgun. The teenagers had never seen the man with the stringy blonde hair before. They also provided a description of the kidnapper's car.
It seems like the people who engage in this are people of questionable and limited mental capacity, and very often they have, I guess what you might say, delusions based on drug use. Very often, you know, the need to get money to promote their drug habits or what drives them, and so we have that being a motive for the kidnappings very much, and that certainly impairs their ability to think or plan or pull this off successfully.
At 10 a.m., over 2 hours after Amy had been abducted, the phone finally rang.
Hello?
It was one of her kidnappers.
Yeah?
Did your son tell you I had your daughter?
The man demanded a $100,000 ransom.
Yeah?
Half was to be in $100 bills, the other half in smaller denominations.
Half of 100, half 50.
None of it could be sequenced.
American order.
As instructed, Amy's father pleaded to speak to his daughter, but the kidnapper refused. Her captor insisted Amy was still alive and that her father could speak to her. When the man called back to say where to drop the ransom, he added that if the family called the FBI, they would never see Amy again. The call lasted less than a minute, not long enough to establish a trace for the technology of 1985. Agents played back the recording, listening for any background noise that might reveal the location. They figured the call was likely made from a payphone since they could hear wind and traffic noise. But they heard nothing more specific.
Yes, sir.
And no one in the family recognized the kidnapper's voice. Though Amy's family was wealthy, her father did not have $100,000 in cash available since most of his assets were tied up in investments. He called his associates to fly in on chartered planes with whatever cash they were able to withdraw. The next call they received was not the one retired Sheriff Eddie Boggs had hoped for. The press had learned of the kidnapping from one of McNeil's neighbors.
I got a call from my chief deputy, and he said that he has all sorts of media representatives out there wanting a story. They knew that there had been a kidnapping, there had been a ransom demand. They demanded to talk to somebody about the story and that they were going to go on the air with it.
If the kidnappers discovered that law enforcement was involved, they would likely dispose of Amy before the ransom was delivered. Investigators discussed what they should do next as precious minutes ticked by. The FBI instructed the family and the Johnson County Sheriff on how to proceed.
And the FBI said, well, here's what you do. You have your chief deputy call each one of the reporters in, ask him for his ID, ask him who is the very top man at his station that he can talk to, and then tell that top man, we're not going to confirm whether or not you have a story, but if you do have a story and you run it, you could possibly cost the life of a little girl.
Every local press agency agreed not to run the story until notified by the sheriff. Just before 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the phone rang again.
Hello?
Yeah, I'm the guy who got your daughter.
It was the same man who had called earlier. On a separate line, an agent contacted the chief of security at the local phone company, who was standing by, hoping to trace the call.
Yeah.
He trapped the number
Yeah,
and began to
that right
track
there.
its origin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mr. McNeil begged the kidnapper to let him hear his daughter's voice.
Calm down.
This time, the man allowed the frightened girl to speak to her father.
Daddy?
Her eyes concealed to prevent her from knowing where she was.
You haven't hurt me.
Be my girl.
He could hear her crying. Despite his own
calm down,
fear,
girl.
he reassured Amy that everything would be okay
No, Daddy, I'm
and that she
okay.
would soon be
You haven't
home.
hurt me.
That's when the man grabbed the phone.
We're having trouble finding the drop zone.
The kidnapper said that he had not yet secured a location for the ransom to be dropped.
What do you mean you're having trouble getting a drop zone?
Again, he promised to call back later.
Hello?
The room fell silent as former Texas Ranger Bill Gunn recalls.
It was very heartrending to listen to it. She was frightened, and of course Mr. McNeil was frightened. The conversation was very short. Mr. McNeil encouraged her to keep her upper lip up and remember who she was. And that was the end of the conversation.
They hoped the trace would be successful.
That's the hardest part, correct?
The security chief reported that the call had originated from outside the phone company's calling area. And since the call had been terminated, it would be impossible to trace it through the neighboring system. The phone company was able to determine that the call was made from somewhere in the town of Kennedale, 25 miles north of the McNeil's estate.
Good.
Amy was still in Texas, close to Fort Worth.
Pin it down? Okay, sounds like.
But without a specific
Pin it down.
location, investigators had little to go
You
on.
know she's in Texas.
We had no idea, no evidence, no leads, nowhere to go. The only thing we had was the description of a car. I did have my troops, what few I had, to go out and start in a perimeter and expanding the perimeter, checking every farm, every house, every housing addition, everywhere they could for a car that matched the description that we had.
Johnson County deputies fanned out over a 30-mile radius from Alvarado up to Kennedale, searching for the kidnapper's car. They also alerted other local officers to be on the lookout for the four-door sedan. Yet without a license plate, it was not likely they'd locate the vehicle among the rural expanse. Almost 6 hours after 13-year-old Amy McNeil had been abducted, her father's friends from Texas and Arkansas had begun to arrive in Alvarado carrying tens of thousands in cash. Texas Rangers escorted them from a small airport to a local bank where the currency would be processed before it was paid to the kidnappers. Wearing latex gloves, Rangers recorded and bundled the $100,000 ransom. They assembled half of it in $100 bills as the kidnapper had instructed. Another $50,000 was compiled from smaller denominations. Retired Texas Ranger Sergeant John Dendy helped direct the processing.
They had quite a time raising that amount of money on such short notice. But after they got the money, then the Rangers that were at the bank started to getting clean bags to put it in. In other words, no fingerprints, plastic bags, and made copies of the bills, so we'd have the serial numbers on each bill. Everything was loaded up, and then all we had to do then was sit and wait until more demands came in.
In the late afternoon, deputies had located a car that fit the description of the kidnapper's vehicle, parked 20 miles from the McNeil's estate. A license plate check revealed that the sedan had been stolen the day before from Mesquite, Texas, 50 miles east of Alvarado. Inside, deputies found no obvious signs of Amy or her abductors. They impounded the car and continued to canvass the area for witnesses who may have seen the driver. At the Johnson County Sheriff's Department, the FBI processed the sedan for forensic evidence. From the interior, they removed several sets of fingerprints. But without a suspect's prints to compare them to, the recovered prints could not help identify Amy's captors or their current whereabouts. By 11:30 p.m., 16 hours after Amy had been taken, her family had received 3 more phone calls, but still had not been told where the ransom was to be dropped. They hoped this would be the call that could secure Amy's release.
Hello?
It was the same man who had called earlier.
Yeah?
Once again, the phone company initiated a trace.
Yeah, I'm working on it right now.
Amy's father told the kidnapper that he had the $100,000 prepared as the man had requested.
No, I don't want to do this tomorrow.
But the caller said that it was too late.
All right,
The ransom drop he had in mind was at least 200 miles away from Alvarado.
There's the gas station.
No.
By the time Mr. McNeil reached the location, it would be light, too risky for the kidnapper to take a chance on being seen.
No, I don't.
The father pleaded to make the exchange tonight.
No, I can't wait till tomorrow.
You wouldn't be there.
The man
I'll be
refused.
calling you at 7 o'clock
He said
p.m.
he'd call back tomorrow to make the arrangements.
We didn't think they would let us have her back alive, you know, in good shape. We had no idea what they'd done to her in this period of time that they'd had her.
Agents waited for word to see if the trace had been successful.
Yeah. No, it wasn't long enough.
It had not.
No. Couldn't get a trace.
Once again, the phone company had failed to secure the kidnapper's location.
All right. Thanks.
Investigators could only hope that 13-year-old Amy McNeil would survive the night and eventually be reunited with her parents. By 5 p.m. on Saturday, January 12, 1985, a day and a half had passed since 13-year-old Amy McNeil had been kidnapped on her way to school in Alvarado, Texas. One of several unidentified kidnappers had called Amy's wealthy family 7 times. He demanded $100,000 in unsequenced currency, but had not told the McNeils where to drop the ransom. Though the kidnapper had also warned Amy's family not to call the FBI, Mr. McNeil had done so and was joined by several agents, a dozen Texas Rangers, and the Johnson County Sheriff's Department. Her abductors had promised to call again at 5 p.m. with the location of the ransom exchange and to confirm that Amy remained unharmed. Despite the agonizing wait, former Special Agent Clint Brown and his team wasted no time in preparing.
When the instructions were anticipated, a plan was devised to deliver the ransom money with Mr. McNeil driving the car and carrying the money himself for delivery, so that anybody would see the car. It was the limousine that he had. They would assume he was in the car by himself. Actually concealed in the car would be 2 FBI agents.
The agents also outfitted Mr. McNeil with a mini cassette device to record any conversations he may have with the kidnappers if they should approach his limousine. The interior of the car would be wired as well, and the 2 concealed agents would be heavily armed. At 5:10 p.m., the kidnapper called again. He told Mr. McNeil to drive 40 miles alone in his limousine from Alvarado on Interstate 30 to East Dallas and take exit 51. There he would find a gas station. The father was to be there by 7 p.m. in order to receive further instructions on the payphone by the vending machine. Mr. McNeil spoke to Amy briefly before her abductor disconnected. She was scared, but unharmed. The call was too brief to be traced. As planned, a contingent of FBI, Texas Rangers, and Johnson County personnel would follow McNeil's car at a distance. The team would be fully equipped, as retired Texas Ranger Bill Gunn remembers.
We got all of the assets available, tracking devices, aircraft. We had a tracking device on Mr. McNeil's car so that if we lost contact with it on the ground, both aircraft could receive it.
Amy's father promised his wife that he wouldn't come home without their daughter. He was fitted with body armor and provided with a sidearm in the event the kidnappers attacked him. The two agents with him would be armed with shotguns and semi-automatic pistols. They checked their radios to make sure they could be heard by the follow team.
You guys okay back there? Check 1, check 2.
Retired FBI Special Agent Rod Kicklighter was assigned to ride in the limousine and advise the concerned father.
I recall one of our main instructions to him was not to let himself be taken hostage. And we talked through that quite a bit. He was to deliver the money, and we would then take over, try to effect the arrest, but he was in no way to get involved himself.
McNeil got the go-ahead to leave for the gas station in East Dallas, 40 miles away. When the limo had reached about a mile, the agent instructed the others to follow. Since the kidnapper had provided a specific route to the Dallas gas station, former Ranger Sergeant John Dendy and the others feared that the kidnappers could be surveilling the limousine as it traveled.
We had no idea where they would be, who they were, what they were in, or anything about them. And in order for them not to become suspicious of any of us, we kept a good distance behind the car.
As the stretch crossed county lines, the Rangers radioed ahead to local authorities. They informed traffic patrols not to stop the speeding unmarked cars and provided license plates for their vehicles. Several units raced ahead to set up surveillance of the service station in East Dallas. While most maintained an outside perimeter, one team held a distant view of the payphone. They stood by, ready to act, in the event that the kidnappers revealed themselves or their 13-year-old hostage. Agents reported that the limousine had just reached exit 51. The phone had begun ringing at exactly 7 p.m. when Amy's father rolled into the service station.
What? Okay, hold on.
It was the 8th call he had received from his daughter's kidnappers over the past 34 hours. The man did not give the father the news he had hoped for. He told Mr. McNeil to take Interstate 20 east to Tyler, Texas, almost 100 miles from Dallas. At the US 69 exit, he would find another gas station, where he'd receive another call at 9:20 on the payphone outside. For retired Special Agent Clint Brown, it was difficult to predict what Amy's abductors might be planning.
We could tell the kidnappers were not very well organized. They seemed somewhat ill at ease, confused. Some of their plans seemed to change. They didn't seem to have a clear idea of where the money was to be delivered, and so they even appeared to be stalling at times, trying to formulate a workable plan that they thought they could use. So it did not appear that they had thought this out very well at all.
At the second gas station in Tyler, Amy's father was directed to drive to a third one in Longview, 40 miles further east, by 11 p.m. From there, he was ordered to drive 60 more miles north to a fourth gas station in Mount Pleasant, Texas. Precisely at midnight, he'd receive another call at the payphone outside. By now, investigators had covered over 180 miles, traveling for well over 5.5 hours. They hadn't anticipated the long trip, and 2 surveillance aircraft were forced to turn back to refuel in Dallas. Despite their frustrations, the team was determined to outlast the kidnappers.
We had no idea what they were going to do next. They just kept running us over East Texas. We saw a large portion of East Texas, and we didn't know when it was going to stop. But we knew that we were there for the duration.
But the situation was only getting worse. About halfway to the Mount Pleasant gas station, the limousine began losing power. After racing at speeds in excess of 100 miles an hour for extended periods, the engine simply quit. Agent Kicklighter feared that the mechanical problem would jeopardize any chance they may have still had to rescue the 13-year-old.
We're all getting a little tense and excited and worried that we're not going to get to the drop site and that we're not going to be able to get Amy back.
Dozens of miles away, at the gas station in Mount Pleasant, 2 camouflaged Texas Ranger snipers had been deployed to surveil the payphone. At midnight, it began to ring. Mr. McNeil was the only one who could answer. But he missed the call. At midnight on January 13th, 1985, just outside Mount Pleasant, Texas, 2 FBI agents and the wealthy father of a kidnapped 13-year-old girl worked frantically to repair a limousine's engine. Mr. McNeil's limousine was the car his daughter's kidnappers expected him to be driving alone to a Mount Pleasant gas station payphone by midnight. As Mr. McNeil tried to restart his car, 2 camouflaged Texas Ranger snipers, deployed to surveil the gas station, watched helplessly as the phone began ringing. Mr. McNeil was the only one who could answer, but he missed the call for the final location of the $100,000 ransom exchange. Patrolling the desolate roads around the gas station in Mount Pleasant, the support team was informed that Mr. McNeil had finally found his car's difficulty, according to former FBI Special Agent Clint Brown.
The car that Mr. McNeil was riding in began to develop electrical problems. Apparently the alternator wasn't keeping the battery charged up, and so as time went on, the lights began to dim and he began to have trouble with the electrical system of the car.
The communications and tracking devices wired to the limo system had drained its power over the past 7 hours. Disconnecting several instruments provided enough juice to get the engine started again. Though the headlights were inoperable, the car would move forward. Mr. McNeil and the 2 agents pressed on without full power and limited visibility. Their path was lit by an aircraft overhead. The remaining FBI agents, Texas Rangers, and Johnson County personnel gathered at a separate filling station a short distance from where the kidnappers had planned to call. They debated what to do next, since Mr. McNeil had missed the midnight appointment, and they had no way of contacting the kidnappers. With few options, investigators decided to send the limousine to the Mount Pleasant gas station late, figuring that the kidnappers would probably call again.
We were pretty well counting on the fact that they were going to show up or call, that they were desperate for the money. We reassured them we had the money, and we certainly reassured them we wanted Amy back. So we thought that they would stay connected to follow through with the payoff site.
At approximately 1 a.m., Mr. McNeil and the FBI agents arrived at the Mount Pleasant gas station in the troubled limousine. Almost 8 hours and 200 miles after they had first departed Alvarado, the limousine's engine gave out for good. The vehicle wasn't going anywhere without major repair. They could do nothing more but wait in the chilly night and pray that the kidnappers would contact them.
Due to the fact that we had to drive very slowly in the limousine, we were late getting to the drop site, approximately an hour. We were somewhat concerned about that, but we set up to wait by the drop site.
Texas Rangers kept watch, remaining hidden in the field across from the gas station. The fate of 13-year-old Amy McNeil remained unknown. Then, at 1:15 in the morning, the payphone started ringing. As investigators had suspected, one of the kidnappers called back, eager to get the ransom. He claimed that Amy was still alive, but refused to let her speak. Worse still, former Texas Ranger Bill Gunn and his team learned that the assailants had likely spotted the heavy presence of law enforcement on the desolate roads.
They started out telling him that he had brought the police with him, and they were very unhappy with that. So they finally told him to bring the money to a motel in Mount Pleasant. And at that time, he informed the man, the kidnapper, that he could not move the vehicle again. It was dead. And the man told him on the phone then, they said, well, we're coming after the money, and we've got plenty of guns, and there better not be any police officers around.
The father remained resolute, despite his fear of what the kidnappers may have already done to his daughter. He grabbed the ransom bag and stood outside so his daughter's captors could see him as they approached. Agents hidden in the limousine readied themselves for an armed confrontation. Retired Special Agent Kicklighter realized a mistake now could cost lives.
The exchange of a ransom during a kidnapping is always one of the most critical elements of the investigation. In this case, you don't want someone else to be hurt or taken hostage and be another victim of a kidnapping.
Hours passed in the cold January night. The Rangers stayed alert, protecting against an ambush. On the road circling the gas station, investigators saw no sign of vehicles approaching the ransom drop.
See anything out here?
By 3 in the morning, 2 hours after the kidnappers had called, it looked as if they weren't going to show. The Texas Rangers, Johnson County deputies, and the FBI considered what their next move should be.
It was decided that they were not going to come, and so the whole surveillance and monitoring situation was called off in anticipation we're going to have to start again the next day on Sunday.
Agents in the limo received word of the decision to regroup until daybreak. Mr. McNeil insisted they stay. But investigators convinced him that at present, there was nothing more they could do for his daughter.
Money, if nothing else, right?
Mr. McNeil was upset that yet another night was going to pass without a resolution to getting his daughter back. He had done everything that they had told him to do, so there was a great deal of disappointment.
A car came by to pick up McNeil and the agents. They headed back to the nearby gas station where others had begun to assemble. The two Rangers, hiding in the field for the past 3 hours, moved toward the street where the sheriff was to meet them in a separate van. As they approached, an unidentified vehicle cruised by their position. It was filled with a group of men and a young girl who headed towards the interstate.
Buick southbound.
The Rangers called for units.
Location. Need somebody to pick them up.
As they watched those believed to be the kidnappers speed off into the cold Texas night. At 3:45 a.m. on January 13th, 1985, 2 Texas Rangers believed they had spotted the kidnappers of 13-year-old Amy McNeil racing away from the Ransom drop point in Mount Pleasant, Texas.
Copy me, command post, copy.
They alerted all available units in the area. En route to collect the Rangers, the Johnson County Sheriff heard their call and saw the suspicious vehicle on the highway. He gave chase, but the sedan easily pulled away from the lumbering van that former Sheriff Eddie Boggs was driving.
My van being as slow as it was, they outran me like I was standing still. There wasn't any way I could keep up even within sight of what was going on, because that chase was going over 100 miles an hour, and it was unbelievable.
Despite his best efforts, the sheriff lost the car and returned to the makeshift command post to provide a detailed account. Amy's life was now in even greater jeopardy since there was no question the kidnappers knew law enforcement was in the area. Then a call came in from their remaining aircraft. The pilot had spotted the vehicle, and investigators still on the road had resumed the chase. Former Texas Ranger Bill Gunn recalls that the suspects were speeding west on Interstate 30.
But at that time, the rest of us had gotten involved, and we were in pursuit of the vehicle. And we continued at a high-speed chase down Interstate 30, which would have been a direction going toward Dallas, and to a small community in another county.
10 minutes later, Texas Rangers, sheriff deputies, and the FBI fell into line. The suspects refused to slow down. As the lead ranger began to close in, he was fired upon. A shotgun and pistol pelted his car with rounds. As he prepared to return fire, he glimpsed 2 girls in the back seat. One was young Amy McNeil, who they were forcing into the back window.
The people who were responsible for this started firing guns at them out the back windows on each side of the Buick. They would push Amy up into the back glass where she could be seen, and of course we couldn't return any fire.
Construction narrowed the interstate to 1 lane, but the suspects did not slow. Shots hit the grill of the lead car. Slugs pierced the carburetor, forcing the Ranger to stop. The chase continued at high speeds through 3 Texas counties before the suspects exited into the small town of Saltillo, Texas.
Dispatch, looks like we're slowing down.
Unexpectedly, at about 4 a.m., they stopped on the front lawn of a home and several fled on foot. They opened fire on investigators. 2 gunmen barricaded themselves behind a van parked in the driveway, while a third disappeared behind the house. None of the officers on the scene were wearing body armor.
When I first got out of the car, I could see this man standing in front of the van. Now, this is Sunday morning at 4 o'clock, and no moon as far as I can remember. And every time he'd pull off around with that 12 gauge, he'd line up for girl.
Investigators took cover behind their vehicles and pinned the gunman down. The suspect's abandoned car was in the direct line of fire. Amy was trapped inside without any means of escape. One assailant attempted to break into the home of an elderly resident. She took cover, not knowing what was happening a few feet from where she had slept. As the firefight raged on, investigators knew that they had to somehow get to Amy McNeil before it was too late. At 4 a.m. on January 13th, 1985, the FBI, Texas Rangers, and Johnson County sheriffs exchanged gunfire with the kidnappers of 13-year-old Amy McNeil. After being held for almost 2 days, Amy remained trapped inside her captor's vehicle with a female assailant on the front lawn of a farmhouse in Saltillo, Texas. Ranger Sergeant John Dendy was one of several who braved the hail of bullets.
I could see one of them behind the front wheel of the car, and that's what I was mainly shooting at. I didn't have any other place to go. And the only thing I knew to do is shut them down. And the only way I'm going to do that is to hit one of them.
Several miles away in another vehicle, Amy's wealthy father was accompanied by the Johnson County Sheriff and an FBI agent on their way to the scene. They could do nothing more but hope and pray that the 13-year-old would survive the battle.
Hopefully here. Go ahead.
As the shooting continued, a Johnson County Sheriff's deputy moved towards the suspect's car, as Ranger Bill Gunn recalls.
One deputy sheriff ran from the vehicle that he arrived in over to the kidnapper's vehicle, and she asked him if he was a police officer, and he said, "Yes, ma'am," and she just really grabbed hold of him then and hung on.
The deputy handed the frightened girl to a ranger who took her out of harm's way. They ran back to the road where more backup arrived. After 44 hours in captivity, 13-year-old Amy McNeil was finally safe. The ranger needed to contact the other investigators and to tell her father the good news. Retired FBI Special Agent Rod Kicklighter was in the vehicle as the ranger's call came through.
It seemed like hours before we finally got the confirmation that Amy was safe. I recall Mr. McNeil beating me about the head and shoulders about Amy being safe and they've got her, and he was ecstatic, as were we all.
Hold your fire! Hold your fire!
While Amy was headed to meet her father, the shooting had subsided. The gunmen had both been wounded. Investigators held their weapons on them, not sure if the suspect still had ammunition. Then, out of the shadows, a third gunman emerged.
Freeze! Get out! Get on your knees! Get on your knees! Drop your weapon!
Realizing that escape was impossible, he surrendered. From inside the kidnapper's car, investigators cuffed the female suspect and a fourth man who had remained there during the shootout. Rangers confirmed with Amy that all the kidnappers were now in custody. On a deserted highway a mile away, Amy ran towards the waiting van that held Mr. McNeil.
Dad! Dad!
Former Special Agent Clint Brown watched the reunion between father and daughter.
Everybody was pretty emotional. You know, we all had kids and daughters and such, so we were pretty emotional just watching that reunion, and everyone was so happy that it had turned out so well that we all shared in that excitement and joy of her being recovered safely.
No one but the suspects had been hit by gunfire. Both were ex-convicts and high on methamphetamine at the time of the shooting. The elderly resident was also examined. She had survived the ordeal with only frayed nerves. A license plate check on the kidnapper's car revealed that it had been stolen in Dallas the day before. Investigators also figured out why the suspects had stopped their vehicle when they had.
We never could understand why they turned in at this particular house, but we found out later they'd run out of gasoline.
34-year-old James Foote, who had made the initial ransom calls, had previously worked for Mr. McNeil and had hatched the plan to kidnap Amy. For using a weapon in the commission of the crime, he was convicted of aggravated kidnapping and attempted murder and was sentenced to life in prison. 27-year-old Michael Mills, who had made the remaining calls, was likewise convicted of aggravated kidnapping and attempted murder, receiving life. The other assailants, 21-year-old Daniel Neckar Jr. and 21-year-old Thomas Barnes, were convicted of the same charges and also sentenced to life. The 18-year-old woman who was with them was charged as the men were. She had only met James Foote a few days earlier before the kidnapping had occurred. The woman was scared when the men brought the 13-year-old into the house, but stayed to prevent Amy from being abused by them. Amy later confirmed that the 18-year-old had protected her, according to retired Johnson County Sheriff Eddie Boggs.
She was only given a 10-year probated sentence per Amy's request. The female accomplice really didn't know what she was getting into at the time whenever she joined them, because they had already been using dope for several days steady before she got involved in it. And it was just she got involved in something she couldn't get out of.
6 months later, on July 4th, 1985, Foote was transferred from the state penitentiary to the Johnson County Jail to face additional charges. Authorities had traced the weapons he used in the kidnapping to the armed home invasion of a Dallas man. Foote was also indicted in Arlington, where he had attempted to kidnap the child of a wealthy developer days before he took Amy. Outside, in the blistering Texas summer, the prison guard agreed to retrieve a water hose to cool down the inmates. When he left, Foote climbed over the 8-foot fence. He made it under the barbed wire. Seconds later, the kidnapper disappeared into the nearby woods. That evening, the Johnson County Sheriff faced the difficult task of informing Mr. McNeil that his daughter's kidnapper had escaped to where no one knew. Deputies would be stationed outside the McNeil home as long as Foote remained at large, fearing that the convict might seek vengeance on the family. Mr. McNeil immediately offered a reward for any information leading to Foote's recapture. A few days later, a call came in to Sheriff Boggs that seemed promising.
James Foote had a cousin that lived up close to Paris, Texas, that called in and said that he knew where he was and had been in contact with him. And that cousin also had some criminal charges pending on him and was willing to make a deal.
Okay, guys, we're going to be entering.
Foote had been hiding in the cousin's Paris, Texas home, 170 miles northwest of the prison.
Gain access to the property.
Johnson County deputies prepared for the assault of the single-story dwelling.
Over here. This is your living room area.
They readied themselves for another armed confrontation. As promised, the cousin made certain that Foote was inside at home for the arrest to take place.
Deputy Sheriff, freeze! Get your hands up and see your
This
hands.
time, there would be no shootout. Sheriff deputies captured Foote without incident. He was returned to prison, where Foote will spend the rest of his life. At the state capitol in Austin, Texas, retired Ranger Sergeant John Dendy was among those who received commendation in recognition for the successful conclusion to the case.
Going to Austin, talking to the governor, getting a commendation. The fact that I knew that I had had something to do with saving this beautiful little girl's life was worth more than anything else they could do. That made everything worthwhile. All the 36 years that I spent in law enforcement, that was the top.
Because law enforcement responded quickly and did not relent, Amy McNeil was reunited with her family and friends, thankful for the determined officers and agents who answered the call. In Kokomo, Indiana, an unthinkable crime terrified residents. A young woman disappeared, apparently kidnapped. After several days of searching, a former FBI profiler narrowed the suspect list to one. Agents and detectives followed the trail across state lines, hoping to find the victim before her time ran out.
Drops of blood and a torn window screen were all that was left to tell authorities what happened to a woman in Indiana. The 21-year-old victim was snatched from her home on a bright spring morning. She appeared to have no real enemies. There was no clear motive. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. In an abduction case, every second counts. This case was plagued by false leads and blind alleys, each one using up valuable time as agents raced to find the victim.
Late spring 1998, Howard County, Indiana. The rural Midwestern farming region was already enduring its first heat wave of the season. Those who weren't farmers stayed inside to avoid the heat. 21-year-old Anita Wooldridge was one of them.
Could you hold on for a second? Thanks.
She planned to have lunch with her grandparents and boyfriend before her afternoon shift at a shipping company. Her boyfriend was supposed to pick her up at around noon.
I have to go. Okay.
But she would never make it. At about 12:30, Anita's mother returned home from work. She was surprised to see her daughter's boyfriend standing out front. Anita's car was gone, but it was unlike her daughter to miss an appointment or to leave the garage door open. Her mother also noticed that the screen from the kitchen window that faced the garage had been removed. Perhaps someone had broken into the house. The front door was unlocked.
Anita!
Anita was nowhere to be found.
Anita! Anita!
In the kitchen, Mrs. Wooldridge spotted blood on the kitchen table and floor.
Oh my God. Yes, I need...
She called 911. Howard County Sheriff's Chief Detective Steve Rogers responded to the call.
I don't know that any of us really knew exactly what we had at that time. We just knew that we had some very suspicious circumstances. We had what appeared to be possibly a forced entry in that the screen had been removed, and that some blood indicated that there could have been a violent act.
The detective issued an APB for Anita and her blue sedan and called in a forensic team that included officers from the nearby city of Kokomo. Technicians recorded the scene while the evidence was still fresh. They retrieved blood from the kitchen, but could not determine if it was Anita's without a sample from the missing girl. The screen found in the garage had been forced out from the kitchen window. Investigators dusted the area for prints. None that were lifted yielded any clues. Detectives interviewed Anita's parents to learn more about their daughter. They described her as a responsible young woman who held a steady job and who would never break plans without calling.
We had a missing person that was responsible and would not have just run off. We found nothing in our interviews with witnesses, talking to family members, that Anita had any problems at home, that she would have just taken off without any explanation.
Okay, good. I need to know what
The detective questioned Anita's boyfriend, who she had been dating for several months.
I came over here.
He claimed to have arrived at Anita's at about 11:45 and had been there for 45 minutes when her mother pulled up.
Just hanging out. Pick up Anita.
Before that, he had been with friends until around 11.
11:45.
tell me about you and Anita, how you two getting along.
That left 90 minutes during which his activities could not be corroborated.
Wait. Stay right
He
here.
had no idea where Anita might be,
Right.
and agreed to come to the station for further questioning if necessary.
We were fine. It was boyfriend and girlfriend.
Authorities examined Anita's bedroom. Mrs. Wooldridge pointed out that Anita's work clothes were still there. She spoke to her daughter's supervisor, but he said Anita had not yet arrived.
Supervisor's name is Mr. Johnson. 451-2345.
The detective called again to see if she had ever shown up.
Her employer told us that, she shows up when she's got a cold, she works when she's not feeling well, she's very dependable, and then the fact that she didn't show up for work that particular day was very significant.
Mrs. Wooldridge said that the only thing missing from Anita's room was a red bathrobe that she had recently embroidered for her daughter. Forensic technicians retrieved hair samples from Anita's brush to begin the lengthy process of mapping her DNA. In the bathroom, Anita had left her glasses and contacts behind. She couldn't drive without them, but her car and her keys were gone. Mr. and Mrs. Wooldridge had also discovered that their bed had been stripped of its comforter and the sheets were rumpled. Investigators suspected that Anita may have been raped there. Forensic technicians processed the room for any physical evidence.
Okay.
They examined the bed with ultraviolet light, searching for seminal fluid on the sheets and blankets. The bedding was clean. In the garage, a detective found a wad of electrical tape. Long strands of hair that resembled Anita's were tangled inside. Police suspected it had been wrapped around the victim's head to hold a gag. If that were true, it may have meant that Anita was taken from the house alive. Detectives spread out from the house looking for witnesses.
There was a neighborhood search conducted by talking to neighbors and walking areas and see if she had been seen anywhere. And at the same time, we were trying to develop any potential suspects by talking to people that she routinely came in contact with.
A deputy interviewed a neighbor who lived across the street from the Wooldridges. He remembered seeing someone in front of their house that morning. At about 10:30, the neighbor spotted a man carrying a blue backpack heading towards the front door. He saw no one else outside after he returned from his errand a half hour later. He couldn't remember if Anita's car was gone by then. Deputies were left with only hunches as to what had happened.
We assumed that the worst could be an abduction, but we definitely knew we had a missing person. So we just wanted to at least, at the very outset, cover all the basics of preserving the crime scene, obtaining any evidence that we possibly could, and then start in the next stage of the investigation, which would be doing as much background on the victim and trying to identify a suspect in an abduction if that's what's happened.
After 24 hours and dozens of interviews, no one had seen Anita or her car. Detectives interviewed a man who was a friend of Anita's father.
Not really.
He claimed that he had spoken to Anita on the phone the morning that she disappeared.
Make sure this is the phone number that you had called.
The Wooldridges' records confirmed it.
Can you tell me about the phone conversation?
The man said he called at about 10:30 or so and asked to speak to Mr. Wooldridge.
Hey.
Anita said her father wasn't there and that she was the only one home.
Right now.
Before she could take a message, she asked him to hold on. Someone was at the door. Anita Anita came back to the phone only to say she had to go. She did not say who had come to the house.
It's almost like she
Increasingly, detectives were convinced that Anita met with foul play.
gotta go. Did she say who was that?
If this was a kidnapping, investigators suspected that whoever was responsible would make contact with the Wooldridges. Technicians tapped the family's phone line. They would be ready if a call came in. Investigators also began to search for anyone who might have had reason to harm Anita.
We had no immediate suspects other than we started looking into all those people that had been in contact with Anita recently.
Detectives interviewed Anita's co-workers at the shipping company. They claimed Anita didn't have any problems with anyone at the job.
We were all over there having drinks and having a good time after work.
But they did remember something a few weeks before she disappeared. At a place where the employees often went to relax, Anita's co-workers saw a man approach Anita. He worked with them at the shipping company and had had several drinks before he started teasing Anita.
And not with you, thank you.
Anita was polite but clearly annoyed. The witnesses thought he didn't appear too happy that Anita had brushed him off.
Kind of swaggers up to her.
They added that the man had not shown up for work the day that Anita disappeared.
And you could tell by the look on her face she did not like it.
Detectives went to question the employee who was at home.
Disappearance of Anita? Yeah. And I'm investigating.
He claimed that his encounter with Anita in the restaurant was an innocent exchange.
We're friends. We're co-workers.
On the morning she disappeared, he said he came into work before his shift and explained to his supervisor that he needed the day off.
Well, not me. I didn't do anything.
He wanted to work on his
I'm out here working
car.
on my car.
You're hiding?
His supervisor confirmed the alibi.
Sorry for the interruptions, but these are questions.
As the hours ticked by, family and friends posted missing persons flyers throughout the area.
If I could put one of these up in your window.
They asked for anyone to call with information about their daughter or her car.
Her or the car.
They also contacted the media to spread the word beyond
We
Kokomo.
haven't heard a thing.
Air surveillance and concerned citizens fanned out across the rural region to assist officers in the search.
A lot of lanes and back roads are in the extreme portions of this county. We had volunteer groups. The civil defense actually went out and formed organized searches of wooded areas. We felt that if we could find her vehicle, that would give us some evidence to lead us in another direction.
48 hours after Anita had disappeared, Detective Rogers received a promising tip from the mother of one of Anita's friends. The woman reported that Anita was having problems with another co-worker at the shipping company. Anita said that the man had sexually harassed her on the job.
Packing the boxes up.
I see you doing a good job.
She was concerned enough to file a complaint against him. Anita told the mother that if she wound up in a dumpster somewhere, you would know who did it. Investigators hoped they could find her before it was too late. They knew every hour she was gone lessened the likelihood Anita would be found alive.
Did he say anything about...
Detectives returned to the shipping company. The supervisor told them that he had no record of a sexual harassment complaint filed against the employee.
He left on his own accord.
He added that the man had resigned 3 weeks earlier and left the state for college. The suspect remained on the list until detectives could determine his whereabouts at the time of Anita's disappearance. While the lead was being checked, investigators continued their search for suspects in the area. They asked Anita's boyfriend to take a lie detector test since his alibi could not be corroborated on the morning Anita went missing. The test consisted of only 2 questions. Did he have anything to do with the disappearance of Anita Wooldridge? And did he know where Anita could be found? He answered no to both, but was found to be deceptive. He remained a suspect, though police had no evidence with which to hold him. After 2 days of searching, investigators were no closer to finding the missing woman. And the chances that she was still alive decreased with each passing day. 2 days after 21-year-old Anita Woolridge disappeared from her suburban home in Indiana, Howard County sheriffs had identified her co-worker and her boyfriend as possible suspects in her abduction. Though evidence found at her house suggested that she'd been taken alive, investigators knew that time was against them. Detectives spoke to Anita's friends to find out more. Most conveyed that they didn't know anyone who would want to hurt Anita, especially her boyfriend. One friend, who had previously worked with Anita at a gym 2 years earlier, said that Anita was nice to everyone, including difficult people. She recalled a member from the gym whose behavior towards the women there was crass.
What's wrong?
His name was Victor Steele. They found him offensive.
Is that Steele? Yes.
But he remained undeterred. Steele bothered Anita in the same way.
Oh, no.
Oh, no. How about a towel?
Yeah, I'll take that.
But she remained characteristically polite when she rejected him, according to Detective Steve Rogers.
What did I do?
Anita was a personality that she was always very forgiving and willing to try to work with anyone, and that she had made an extra effort to try to get along with this individual.
The man's behavior never changed, and his membership was eventually terminated. Anita's friend remembered that Victor Steele lived in Howard County at the time. Investigators checked on Steele's background.
When his name came up, we were able to locate his name in the Indiana Sex Offender Registry and learned from that he had been convicted in Monroe County, I believe in 1984, of an abduction.
Though Detective Rogers didn't know if Steele had any contact with Anita in the past 2 years, he believed Steele was the most promising suspect so far. To substantiate his theory, the detective turned to retired FBI profiler Steve McVeigh for guidance.
He had 3 or 4 people that he had to look at as suspects. He's wanting to see if we can narrow these down and to give some focus to the case. He has limited resources, and certainly time was the most critical of those. And if we could focus, then we'd be a little bit better off.
The profiler examined the crime scene reports and the backgrounds of each suspect. 41-year-old Victor Steele's background stood out. The circumstances surrounding Steele's conviction 15 years earlier had many similarities to Anita's disappearance. In December of 1984, Steele had stalked a woman on an Indiana University campus where he was a student. One night, he waited outside for her boyfriend to leave. Like Anita, the young woman had previously turned down his advances. Knowing she was alone, Steele approached the house.
Hey, what are you doing?
When the woman answered her door, Steele pushed his way inside.
Just want to talk to you, that's all. Let me talk to you. You treat me terrible. I don't understand it.
He pulled a knife from a blue backpack and threatened to kill her if she did not submit to being raped.
He'd had contact with her. He didn't live all that far from her. He carried the backpack that he had, as same as in the first instance, which he used as a crime kit, where he brought his tape, his ropes, and whatever else that he was going to use. And that's very, very distinctive.
After raping her, he forced her to walk with him at knife point. He told her to act like they were lovers or else he would stab her. The profiler recognized that part of Steele's fantasy was to feel like he was her boyfriend.
He had hoped to make this gal love him, his victim love him. He didn't look at it as a rape. Now, 15 years later, if it were the same guy, he would have the same signature, but he would be more sophisticated about it.
Most importantly, Steele did not kill his victim.
Want to go?
He released her on the condition that she would not call the cops. She agreed, then ran to the nearest phone to call 911. Victor Steele was arrested hours later.
I think that he looks back on the case in 1984 as a mistake, that he was not thorough enough in indoctrinating her or winning her over as sufficiently as he thought he had. And then when he let her go, she identified him and sent him to prison.
Victor Steele served 8 years behind bars for first-degree rape and abduction. He was distraught over the conviction. In prison, Steele attempted suicide twice. If he had abducted Anita, he was not going to make the same mistake again.
Victor Steele wanted to find a lady that he could, in effect, make love him. And if he couldn't, if it didn't work, then he was prepared, in my opinion, to kill her. And so, love me or I'll kill you is a very succinct description of what went on in this case.
The profiler stressed the importance of not revealing the investigation to Steele. If the suspect felt police were on to him, he would probably kill Anita and himself. Kokomo City Detective Michael Holzapfel was called in to work undercover and help locate the suspect.
The task of finding him involved us immediately in doing a surveillance of his last known residence, which was the home of his mother, which was on the outskirts of our city here in Howard County.
2.5 days after Anita disappeared, police set up outside the Steele residence. No one was seen entering or leaving. They needed a way to find out who was inside without blowing their cover. A car parked in front might be their way in.
We observed that there was a vehicle for sale outside of his house. We seized on that as an opportunity to establish contact under a ruse of being interested in making the purchase of the car, recognizing that we wouldn't have to compromise our identity.
Posing as potential buyers, undercover officers wearing wires prepared to make contact with whoever was home. They had no idea if Steele or Anita were inside. The suspect might do anything to protect his freedom. Every moment's delay dwindled the possibility that Anita remained alive. In June of 1998, investigators searched for convicted rapist Victor Steele in the abduction of a missing Indiana woman. 2.5 days after her disappearance, police set up surveillance outside his last known residence. Undercover detectives posing as used car buyers planned to make contact with the 41-year-old suspect. Though each hour that passed decreased the victim's chances for survival, Kokomo City Detective Michael Holzapfel believed that there was still hope.
A sexual predator would enjoy a sense of self-assurance by way of his having made it from the scene with his captive victim. That probably presented a window of opportunity to us as investigators that she would still be kept alive.
Wired for their own safety, they knew that approaching the house may put the victim at risk if Victor Steele discovered that he was a suspect, according to retired FBI profiler Steve McVeigh.
I told him, tell your guys you've got to be extremely discreet in this whole investigation, although we must press because time is of the essence. We have to do it in such a way that it arouses absolutely zero suspicion on Victor's part. And if he had any suspicion whatsoever that he had come under suspicion of the police, then he would dispose of her.
An older woman answered the door.
No.
She told the undercover detectives that the car for sale belonged to her son, Victor. The detectives said they were ready to buy now and were invited inside to discuss the price and the vehicle's history. The mother claimed that her son had moved to Wisconsin a few weeks earlier. Without her permission or a warrant, detectives were unable to search the house independently. They believed she was not likely involved, but they weren't convinced that she wouldn't alert her son to the search. She added that Victor hadn't hooked up his phone yet in Wisconsin, so she had no way to reach him.
No, he's gonna call.
She would have to speak with him before she could set a price.
Sometimes he's here. Sometimes he's here.
The detectives promised to keep in touch and looked forward to speaking to the owner himself. The FBI profiler remained confident Victor Steele was the primary suspect.
We could not eliminate him, and in fact, the secure place that I thought he would have taken her to, and where he could spend a significant amount of time with her, might very well be in a totally different area where no one knew him at all, and no one would have any idea of looking for him there. And that he very likely had gone and prepared a place and had in fact come back and taken her without his mother ever even knowing it.
24-hour surveillance by undercover officers continued as other team members discreetly gathered more background on Steele. They learned he was unemployed and owned a red pickup, but they could not figure out where he was staying. With each passing day, pressure to find the suspect and the victim mounted upon Howard County Chief Detective Steve Rogers.
We wanted to find this young lady alive. People were looking at us and saying, well, gosh, can't you do something? And we weren't at liberty to talk about what we were doing and what we thought we could get done. We had to be very guarded with that information.
Victor Steele's credit card statements revealed that he had rented a truck in Indiana a few days before the crime. Company records showed that Steele had traveled 910 miles round trip. Investigators divided the distance in half and traced a 450-mile circle around Kokomo, Indiana. One town that intersected was La Crosse, Wisconsin. Steele's credit card records also showed that he purchased gas at a convenience store on the date he rented the truck. Detectives called the parent company to determine the store's location. It was near La Crosse, Wisconsin. They notified the FBI that it was likely Victor Steele had crossed state lines with the victim. FBI Special Agent David Fitzgerald of the Eau Claire, Wisconsin resident agency was assigned the case.
We were able to offer them the ability to bring in other agents if need be, to conduct investigation anywhere within the state of Wisconsin. And if things were going to lead out of the state of Wisconsin, the FBI is one of those agencies that has a network in place where we can contact people all over the country to help them out.
6 days after 21-year-old Anita Woldridge disappeared, her missing blue sedan was found close to her home on a suburban street in Howard County, Indiana. It was just a few miles from Steele's house. The car was unlocked, and the keys were still in the ignition. Investigators feared Anita's body might be stashed in the trunk. She was not there, but her red bathrobe was. Underneath, they found evidence that was more encouraging. Severed electrical ties.
This was a very important thing with the profiler. He indicated to us that if these had been used to secure her arms or legs, that when they were cut from her, that would be to assist her in getting out of the vehicle. There was a good possibility that she was at least alive when she was taken out of the trunk.
Detectives found no blood, seminal fluid, or other signs of struggle in the vehicle. Nor did they find fingerprints far into the car. From the driver's side window, they were able to lift what they believed was an elbow print. Technicians preserved it in the hopes it would match their suspect. Detective Rogers asked the profiler whether they should allocate a portion of his limited resources to the search in La Crosse, Wisconsin.
Steve Rogers asked me if I thought it was worth him taking a troop of his people to Wisconsin to look for. We even had the name of a town where a gas purchase had been made. Now, that was really iffy in terms of that specific town being exactly where he had her. That part I was not certain at all about, but we had nothing else at that point.
A contingent of Indiana detectives headed for La Crosse, Wisconsin, where they believed Steele had taken Anita. They met with Special Agent David Fitzgerald and La Crosse police at a command center in the city of 50,000.
They really didn't have any specific information that Victor was here and he was here now, nor did they have any specific information that the victim, Anita, was here and was here now. And they kind of looked at us and said, "You guys must think we're crazy for being here." But, you know, they had been up for a day and a half and felt pretty strongly that something was going to happen in our area, and we were just there to help them.
Not wasting any time, that evening investigators split up into several teams, looking for Steele's red pickup truck on the streets of La Crosse until 4 in the morning. But without an address or even a general location of where Steele and his victim may be, the search was fruitless. Once again, they turned to FBI profiler Steve McVeigh to help eliminate locations.
They asked me whether they were looking for a victim or a dead body. I replied that it was most likely that she was still alive and would be as long as he thought he could control her, and that he was not under suspicion by the police. That he would keep her for a fairly significant amount of time. He would keep her in a place that he had absolute control over and felt totally secure.
Investigators clung to hope that a week after her disappearance, Anita Wooldridge was still alive. 7 days after 21-year-old Anita Wooldridge had disappeared from her suburban Indiana home, authorities believed it was possible that she was still alive. They suspected convicted rapist Victor Steele was holding her somewhere in La Crosse, Wisconsin, but Chief Detective Steve Rogers had no proof and no known address.
We had a hope that she was alive. We did not know that she was alive. This was our last-ditch effort to find her, in the sense of finding her alive, that we had to get there, set up a command post, and be ready for when we received the information where he could possibly be.
Remember us?
To get it, undercover detectives wearing hidden transmitters returned to Steele's last known residence, his mother's home in Howard County, Indiana. Posing as interested buyers for the suspect's used car out front, officers hoped to glean Steele's whereabouts from his mother. Kokomo City Detective Michael Holzapfel was aware of the danger.
Our concern was that if we were discovered making our inquiries regarding Victor Steele at this stage of the investigation, that we might be contributing to the murder of this victim, that it might place her life at immediate risk.
It was a risk they had to take. His mother maintained that she still didn't have a telephone number for her son in Wisconsin, but she did have an address. The undercover officer repeated the address out loud to his partner so it could be heard by detectives listening outside. They immediately called Chief Detective Steve Rogers at the FBI office in La Crosse, Wisconsin.
Captain, I got the address.
My team people are in the street with the La Crosse Police Department and the La Crosse FBI, and I'm relaying this information, and at that particular point when I tell them, "Do you have a Clinton Street in La Crosse?" and they looked at me rather strange and said yes, I said, "That's where he's at."
FBI and La Crosse detectives arrived in minutes. They identified the red pickup truck parked outside as Victor Steele's.
As soon as Victor Steele's vehicle and residence were, in fact, under surveillance, I requested assistance with the local authorities there to go to a local court, local magistrate, and apply for a search warrant for the address on Clinton Street and for Victor Steele's vehicle and for the person of Victor Steele.
While they waited for the warrants, agents contacted the owner who lived close by to find out if Steele had in fact rented the house. He confirmed the suspect was his tenant. Steele had claimed that he wanted to turn the building into a bookstore. The the landlord provided a sketch of the building's interior layout. He also gave the FBI a key to the front door. Outside the rental property, investigators consulted the FBI profiler. They asked him what the chances were that Steele was holding Anita inside the building. Profiler Steve McVeigh warned that if she was there, getting to her safely would be difficult.
They were trying to determine whether they needed to storm the place or whether that was even the place that he would have her or not. So I was confident he did in fact have her there. She would be very well secured. I did tell him that I thought there was at least a 50-50 chance that should they attempt to storm the place while he's there, that he would kill himself and kill her too.
Investigators had no way to confirm who was inside. If they waited to go in, they might be too late.
We were again calculating with the resounding thump of this clock ticking in the back of each of our minds and our hearts as to whether or not do we make an entry? Do we wait? Do we stage a surveillance, watch and wait? Do we go ahead and force an entry? That decision was in part made by us witnessing Victor Steele leave the residence.
After a week of searching, investigators got their first glimpse of the suspect. He climbed into his truck and drove away. The surveillance team followed, but decided it would be imprudent to stop him for questioning.
One of the risks that we did face is that, say, he had Anita at another location that was not the residence, and he decided that he did not want to cooperate with us, and he just left. He may never go to that place again, and we may never find Anita.
Agents tracked Steele to a lumber yard. A detective followed the suspect inside. Steele seemed interested in long planks of wood.
I witnessed him make purchase of lumber. That in itself was a chilling observation and bit of information to convey back to the surveillance team because we had thoughts in mind. What's he using lumber for? To make a cage, to make a coffin?
The detective reported back to the other investigators. They watched as Steele returned to his pickup with the lumber.
Check it out and follow him on the way out.
Investigators continued their tale. Steele retraced the route he had taken from his rental property. They had to decide soon if they were going to risk stopping him without knowing for sure where he was going or where he had stashed Anita.
If he had her alive and she was somewhere else, he would have went to her by now. But since he had not been away from the residence to any other location, we felt strongly that if she was alive, that she would still be there at that residence.
They decided they weren't going to let Steele return to the rental property.
Take him down, take
A
him down.
lacrosse detective radioed to a uniformed officer to stop the pickup. The decision would mean the difference between life and death for Anita Woolridge. 8 days after a 21-year-old Indiana woman was abducted from her home, the FBI and local authorities stopped the prime suspect in La Crosse, Wisconsin. They believed Victor Steele was holding Anita Woolridge in a rented house nearby, but they had no proof that she was there or that she was still alive. Since they did not have enough to arrest the suspect, A La Crosse police cruiser pulled the pickup to the side of the road on the pretense of a routine traffic stop. Then the FBI approached. Special Agent David Fitzgerald asked the suspect if he would assist in their investigation.
He wasn't under arrest, and I didn't want to make him feel like he was. I had no probable cause that I was aware of at that time to arrest Mr. Steele, and I just wanted to have a conversation with him.
Steele agreed to cooperate and accompanied agents back to the FBI office. The sex offender claimed to know nothing about Anita Woldridge's disappearance and lied about where he was living.
Mr. Steele indicated that he thought that he had been stopped by law enforcement officers for his failure to register as a sex offender in the state of Wisconsin. And he indicated that he had been in Wisconsin for a couple days and that he was staying in his truck.
At Steele's rental property, investigators prepared for entry. They would be ready when they got word the warrant was signed by a judge. It was a difficult wait for Detective Michael Holzapfel.
The greatest anxious moments of the investigation I would describe occurred in awaiting the arrival physically of a search warrant that was being then prepared at our command center. We had Victor Steele. He was no present threat to anyone. We didn't know what the condition or circumstance Anita was suffering at that moment.
They got the warrant. The entry team used the key provided by the landlord. They exercised extreme caution, aware that the place may be booby-trapped.
Anita, police!
Officers swept through the rooms, including the basement, announcing their presence. But the team heard no answer to their calls.
Closet clear. Closet clear!
It appeared they had been wrong. At the FBI office in La Crosse, an agent and detective continued their interview with Victor Steele.
Nope.
The suspect admitted that he once knew a woman named Anita from a health club, but he hadn't seen her for a while. Without Steele's cooperation, investigators realized they may never find Anita, and they didn't have enough to place him under arrest.
Again, Mr. Steele indicated that he couldn't help law enforcement officers. He talked about the fact that he was not under arrest, he was detained, and he basically said, do what you gotta do to get me out of here.
Anita! FBI!
In the last room, authorities spotted a large metal cabinet lying face up on the floor. Its doors appeared to be secured with a broken broom handle and a butter knife.
We didn't communicate verbally at that particular time, but the communication was clear that we wanted to be cautious of booby traps. We wanted to be cautious about disturbing evidence, but we needed to open that cabinet.
The team members believed, dead or alive, the search for Anita was at an end. They saw no suspicious devices attached to the box, nor did they hear movement from within. Carefully, they freed the cabinet's handles.
Anita? Wait.
After 8 days, Anita was alive.
It was hard for me to believe that it was really going to be over. And they opened the box and there's like 5 or 6 police officers standing there. And I'm like, thank God, take me home.
Anita Woldridge told her rescuers that though she was not gagged, she had been conditioned by Victor Steele not to call out.
He told me he might make fake noises, so if I would scream for help, then he would kill me. And then when the police actually came to the door, I was still afraid to scream because I thought he might be playing a tape or making it up.
She was handed over to the emergency medical technicians. Except for dehydration, she remained healthy even after her long ordeal. Victor Steele was placed under arrest for kidnapping and sexual assault. He remained unfazed.
Victor really was not remorseful about what he had done. It appeared to me that if there was any remorse, it was in the fact that he had been caught.
From the health club where you used to
Anita had little to eat during her captivity. She ate her first meal as she explained to investigators the events that began 8 days earlier. Victor Steele arrived at her home at about 10:30. She recognized him from the health club and invited him in. He told her he had been out riding a bike and asked if he could come in for a glass of water.
Didn't seem like a big deal that he came to the door. I knew he rode his bike everywhere, and I mean, it was really hot that day. And I just never second thought I was going to get him a glass of water, send him on his way.
Anita asked Steele to wait while she wiped up blood from the kitchen floor where she had cut herself earlier. When her back was turned, Steele drew a stun gun from his backpack.
I didn't know what was happening. It was all so fast, and I realized, like, I'm being attacked, and I started screaming, even though I knew no one's going to hear me. All the windows are shut and air conditioners are on. And then when he hit me in the stomach, it's just, I lost all control of my legs. Like, they just went limp.
Steele disguised himself in women's clothes before he left the house. He first grabbed the bedspread, then Anita's robe to cover her bound wrists.
Get in here and I don't hear anything out of it.
He tried to shove her out the kitchen window, but decided it was easier to walk her to the car.
Keep your mouth shut.
He locked her in the trunk. Before taking her to Wisconsin, he brought her to his mother's house and raped her.
I'd always thought I'd rather die than be raped, and then it was almost like survival mode took over my body. It was like, okay, we're going to get through this, and I'm going to do everything in my power not to die like this and have my parents with unanswered questions.
So, you understand me? Get in.
In La Crosse, Wisconsin, Steele showed her a metal wardrobe that would be her new home. He threatened to kill her if she tried to escape.
Don't you bother.
Anita agreed not to try, but Steele didn't trust her.
I'll take that board. I'll beat you with it.
He left a quarter on top of the wardrobe to indicate if she tried to get out.
I didn't like being confined like that, but at least if I was in there, I knew he couldn't touch me. But it also made it very dreadful every time I heard the box open, because I knew I was either going to have to play games with him or be raped, or he'd just see him.
Anita returned home to the warm welcome of friends and family. Detective Michael Holzapfel was surprised the case ended as well as it had.
Having worked so many broken bodies, so many fractured stories, so many occasions that it didn't come out like you would wish, that you would hope. Although this young woman suffered an incredibly a devastating victimization, she's still alive, and people work together to support her in bringing her home alive.
Victor Steele acted as his own attorney in his January 1999 trial and was convicted of kidnapping, carjacking, and weapons possession. He was sentenced to life without parole and serves his time in the United States Penitentiary in Beaumont, Texas.
I think my goals in life are a little bit different. I never thought of doing anything in law enforcement, and now that's something I'm looking into, that I would like to do that to help other people. And it gives me a goal that, I want other people like him off the streets. And so that's a little bit different than my original plan in life.
The life-changing experience would have shattered many others. But Anita Woldridge transcended her ordeal because of her strong personality and individual faith. She now hopes to become an FBI agent, to help others as they helped her. In the summer of 1988, a wealthy Jackson, Mississippi woman disappeared from her home in broad daylight. The only clue left behind was a mysterious ransom note. The FBI and local police struggled to find answers in its cryptic message so they could find the kidnapper and retrieve the victim before her time ran out.
A daring kidnapping and a bizarre ransom note baffled Mississippi authorities. The victim was the wife of a wealthy businessman. A list of 12 names and a few drops of blood were the only clues to her fate. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The ransom note gave the FBI its first leads, but the case was not so clear-cut. Solving it required the keen insight of a criminal profiler and the perseverance of a family, local authorities, and the FBI.
"6 a.m., July 26, 1988. The heat of a midsummer day would soon bear down on the southern city of Jackson, Mississippi. Like every weekday for the past 48 years, Annie Laurie Herron had coffee with her husband Robert before he left for work. As early investors in oil, the Herrons had become one of Mississippi's wealthiest couples, with a fortune estimated at more than $100 million. That day, Annie Laurie Herron would host her bridge club at home, the same house where she raised 2 children and lived with her husband since they were newlyweds. By 3:30, Mrs. Herron's bridge game was over and her friends had left. The housekeeper finished cleaning up after the card game and checked if Mrs. Herron needed anything else. The 73-year-old woman said everything was fine. Annie Herron planned to spend the rest of her afternoon reading until her husband returned. She wasn't expecting anyone, but perhaps one of the bridge players or the housekeeper had forgotten something. Her husband wasn't due home for an hour.
I'm fine, thank you. How are you? Good. You got to see your husband. I have a letter. Come back and see him. No, I don't mind waiting at all.
Annie Laurie Herron was on her own. At about 4:30 that afternoon, Robert Herron returned from work.
Annie, I'm home.
He saw that his wife wasn't home and figured she was out with her friends or daughter. When she hadn't returned by 5:30, he thought it was strange that his wife of 48 years hadn't called or left a note.
Annie.
The house seemed to be empty.
Annie.
Robert grew concerned and began calling family and friends.
Anywhere that I can tell?
No one had seen Annie since the bridge game.
Maybe we're going to have to do something else. Thank you.
Robert's son-in-law, who lived nearby, said he would be right over. The son-in-law said he and his wife hadn't heard from Mrs. Herron that day.
Oh, right here.
Robert Herron pointed out that when Annie left the house, she usually took her purse.
I've looked everywhere. I called,
But his wife's purse and shoes sat beside her reading chair. Her newspaper and glasses were
The
nearby.
neighbors, you know, are just, I just don't know what to say.
Robert was worried since Mrs. Heron's medicine for a chronic intestinal disease was still in the bathroom. She would need to take it soon or she would not be able to absorb food. The men continued to search for some indication of where she'd gone. A piece of paper near the front door caught the son-in-law's eye. It was a ransom note without specific instructions. Annie Laurie Heron had been kidnapped.
We've got to do something real fast.
The note demanded that Robert Heron pay 12 separate men before 10 days passed, but it didn't say how much or where to send the money. He was ordered not to call police, so he waited for a ransom call with instructions on getting his wife back. When none came by nightfall, he contacted the Jackson Police Department despite being warned not to. Officers secured the ransom note, hoping to keep any fingerprints intact. Processing the house for evidence, officers discovered a trace of what appeared to be blood on the front door frame. Laboratory tests would later reveal that it was blood and that it matched Mrs. Heron's blood type. A Jackson police detective interviewed Robert Heron. They wanted to know if he or his wife had ever been threatened.
I'd like to ask you a few questions.
He had no idea who would want to harm
It
them.
was there for me to find. It's a ransom.
If Mrs. Heron were without her medication for long, her intestinal condition would become critical.
Just hold it just like that.
Kidnapping is a crime that must be solved quickly, or the chances of rescuing the victim are slim. That evening, Jackson police contacted Special Agent Patrick McGlennon of the FBI's Jackson Field Office to bring the resources of the federal government to bear right away.
Under the federal kidnapping statute, the FBI has jurisdiction whenever an individual is kidnapped in the United States. The presumption in this case, of course, was a kidnapping had occurred, a ransom demand had been made, and the possibility of travel interstate is in fact why the FBI gets involved in these types of matters.
The FBI called U.S. Attorney James Tucker, who would advise investigators in legal matters as the case developed. Like most residents of Jackson, Tucker had great admiration for the Herons.
Robert Heron was a self-made man, and at the time of this incident, which was 1988, Mr. Heron was probably considered one of the foremost financial wizards here in the Jackson area. He was well known in the business community. He was a generous person, so he was becoming well known for his particular acts of generosity.
By dawn the next day, FBI agents and evidence technicians arrived at the Herons' home. The Jackson police detective filled in the case agent on what they'd learned so far. The FBI set up a satellite command post at the residence and tapped the Herons' phone, ready to trace any ransom calls. There was little doubt that multi-millionaire Robert Heron was the real target. Yet Mr. Heron hadn't been told what to pay to get his wife back.
It was impossible to comply, or nearly impossible to comply, with the demands because they were nonspecific in nature. Mrs. Heron was not even mentioned in the note. There was no provision for her safe return.
The note did say that the 12 men listed had been involved in the same photography company. Robert Heron explained that he had once served as chairman of the board for that company. Some of the company's franchisees had been sued to recoup losses, but Heron did not know which ones. It seemed unlikely that the 12 men named had kidnapped Mrs. Heron, but perhaps one or more of them was striking back at the company through Robert Heron. Technicians collected samples of all the writing pads and paper in the Herons' home. They would compare the paper to the ransom note to see if it had been written on the stock from the house. The results would take a few days. Investigators searched outside the house for hairs, blood, clothing, anything that might reveal the kidnapper's identity. They looked for cigarette butts or evidence of food or drink, signs that someone had been watching the house. They found nothing.
Yesterday afternoon.
Neighbors and domestic workers reported seeing nothing strange at the house the previous afternoon, and no one had seen Mrs. Heron leave.
Quiet neighborhood, we should.
The next day, agents continued canvassing the Herons' neighborhood.
Dr. Posey?
They questioned a doctor who lived down the street.
Detective Johnson, Jackson Police Department would like to ask.
He said that he had seen something in the neighborhood recently that might be related to the kidnapping. 2 weeks earlier, the doctor was going to run errands when he drove past a white van parked near his house. From that position, anyone in the van would have a clear view of the Heron house.
Around here?
Yeah, about 50 blocks.
At first, the doctor thought nothing of it. But when he'd returned home hours later, the van was still there. Thinking the driver needed help, the doctor offered his assistance.
Can I help you with anything? Wondering if you need some help.
The driver responded by asking if there was a law against parking in the neighborhood. It was an odd response, enough to make the doctor remember the incident.
Thank you, sir. If you think of anything else...
He said the van drove away minutes later.
Thank you, Dr. Posey.
Agents continued to canvass the Herons' neighborhood and found another neighbor who had seen a white van on the street 3 months earlier.
The other neighbor had seen a van similar to that described by the first individual, sitting almost directly in front of the Heron residence in the very earliest days of April of 1988. She was suspicious enough of the van to get the license plate number.
If investigators could find that van, they might also find Mrs. Heron. But a computer check revealed that the license plate had been stolen from a car at the New Orleans airport. It was another dead end. After 36 hours of investigation and no ransom calls, agents hoped lab results on the note would provide a fresh lead to Mrs. Heron or her abductor. FBI examiners first determined that the note had been typed on paper foreign to the Herons' home. They also compared the typeface to known samples from every typewriter made in this century.
The laboratory division was able to determine that the demand letter was in fact typed by a Royal typewriter manufactured between 1912 and 1927. There was nothing else contained on the demand letter which would give analysts any type of ability to tell us the manufacturer of the paper or whether there were any indented writing or other evidence on the letter.
A latent fingerprint examination revealed nothing, and a spot on the note believed to be a bloodstain was too small to analyze. Although no evidence on the note helped agents, they hoped its message would. The note demanded that Robert Heron pay 12 men who were involved with a photography company. Perhaps the kidnapper was among them. Agents learned that the company had foreclosed on each of the 12 men, all former franchisees, to collect heavy debts. One of the company's executives provided the FBI with company files and photos of those men.
Are you going to have to take those with you?
Yes, sir.
One was now deceased. The others were scattered throughout the country.
Yes, sir.
At the FBI's Jackson field office, agents split up the 11 names and began to review the files and photographs. They sent leads to FBI offices in the towns and cities where the men currently lived, requesting additional information. Agents found that many had financial troubles. They tried to ascertain if those men had traveled near the Heron neighborhood when the white van was spotted there, and again recently when the kidnapping occurred. FBI agents across the country began covert surveillance on the former franchisees. They hoped one of the men would lead them to the ailing 73-year-old woman. But as the kidnapping investigation stretched into its third day, only 7 days remained on the ransom note deadline, and agents still lacked instructions on how to recover Annie Laurie Heron alive.
Hi, how are you, ma'am? I'm fine.
3 days had passed since Annie Laurie Heron, an elderly grandmother, had been abducted from her Jackson, Mississippi home in broad daylight. The FBI continued surveillance on 11 men named in the ransom note found inside the Herons' home. Agents couldn't confront the men. A frightened kidnapper might harm the victim. Special Agent Patrick McGlennon hoped one of them would lead to the missing woman.
We wanted to determine if they were traveling even small distances from their residences or business. We wanted to see if they perhaps were keeping Mrs. Heron at a remote location where they might have to provide food, water, other conveniences for her, that they wouldn't want to be too far away from the victim.
Despite the efforts of dozens of agents around the country, they discovered no direct leads to Mrs. Heron's whereabouts. But they still resisted contacting the 11 men directly so as not to reveal the investigation. The FBI considered the possibility that the kidnapper might be someone other than the men listed on the note. Agents contacted the Behavioral Science Unit of the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia for assistance. Profilers in the unit are agents trained to determine characteristics of criminals from the details of a case. One profiler reviewed the evidence, particularly the ransom note, looking for indications of the kidnapper's psychological makeup. The profiler called in his findings to the Jackson FBI agents working the Heron kidnapping.
You mind if I put you on speakerphone so we can all listen at one time? Yeah. All right, go ahead.
In the conference call, the profiler confirmed that the kidnapper was likely one of the 11 suspects currently under surveillance.
Which nobody else would ever use. So.
And since all those men had at least some college education, he believed one of them had intentionally misspelled words and used an old typewriter to throw off investigators.
He has a fixation.
The profiler said the abduction was an act of revenge against Robert Heron by a paranoid individual who was willing to kill.
The Behavioral Science Unit believed that a sole perpetrator was responsible for this crime, that it would be a white male of approximate middle age, and that the individual would probably be working alone, although if they were working in concert with someone else, that person would provide a very subordinate role.
It's bad.
The profiler also concluded that by this time, there was only a 50% chance that Annie Heron was still alive. One further detail caught the profiler's eye, a phrase that did not seem to match the rest of the note and might point to the profession of the kidnapper.
The note said, "Pay them whatever damages are owed to them. If any is dead, pay their children." Damages is a legal term. It was telling in that one of the individuals on that demand note was an attorney.
Special Agent Tom Montgomery of the FBI's Jacksonville, Florida office was called in to investigate the attorney listed on the note, a man named N. Alfred Wynn.
After we received the name of N. Alfred Wynn, we did the public record background checks. We also contacted the St. Petersburg Police Department, the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, found that he had no criminal record, did our own computer checks also. We determined that he was a St. Petersburg attorney and that he lived above his office.
Yeah. What's this all about?
Well, I'm investigating a crime.
An agent went to interview Wynn at his office residence.
So, Mr. Wynn, you were camping at the girlfriend.
Alfred Wynn said he had nothing to do with the kidnapping and explained where he was on July 26th, the day Mrs. Heron went missing. He had been at a bar with a prostitute. He said that on that evening he had called his paralegal back at the office.
Okay. Hey, thanks.
He asked the employee to meet him at the bar to lend him $100 so he could go home with the prostitute.
Big time. How about you?
The paralegal promised to be right over. Wynn said he and the prostitute went outside. He stalled for time as he waited for his paralegal to show up with the money. The two were in Wynn's car when his assistant arrived.
Hey, Don. Hey, way to go.
Wynn took the money, then left with the prostitute. Wynn said he didn't remember much about the evening. He didn't know the name of the bar or the prostitute's real name. The next day, agents checked the alibi with Wynn's paralegal when the attorney was out of the office. He corroborated his boss's story and also claimed that he didn't know the bar's name since he had never been there before or since. Agents suspected both men were lying.
We learned that Wynn had paid for the paralegal's schooling at a local community college, his paralegal schooling. We had learned that he was working for basically a very minimum salary, and there was a lot of allegiance between the paralegal and Mr. Wynn.
Later, an agent re-interviewed Wynn's paralegal, explaining their suspicions. He maintained that he had met Wynn at the bar on the same day of the kidnapping, though he did reveal something new about his boss. He said that Wynn's legal battle with the photography company had begun when the company foreclosed on him 7 years earlier, and that he had fought the lawsuit with a vengeance. He had attempted to declare bankruptcy 3 times in order to avoid paying his debts. Under a court order to recover the money, the U.S. Marshal's Office had confiscated Wynn's valuables, including 1,000 shares of expensive stock. They also impounded Wynn's European sports coupe, a car the paralegal said Wynn loved. In addition, they put his St. Petersburg office up for auction. On July 6, 1988, less than 3 weeks before Mrs. Heron disappeared, Wynn had been notified of an eviction hearing. But he had refused to leave. The paralegal said that Wynn had been furious, believing that the photography company had ruined his life.
Going to get that date from me? You're going to check that date?
The FBI wondered if the paralegal had been involved in the kidnapping.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
We pulled all vehicles registered to the paralegal, friends and associates of Mr. Wynn, to include Mr. Wynn, and learned that the paralegal had a white van registered to him, and through an interview of the paralegal learned that the vehicle was utilized by Wynn on several occasions.
It seemed to be a major breakthrough in the case. The vehicle identification number revealed the name of the previous owner. An agent went to interview her.
You're right, it's just like you said.
He didn't return until...
She said Alfred Wynn, not his paralegal, had been the actual buyer. She said that Wynn had acted strangely. He was adamant that his name not be written on the title. So the woman left the line for the buyer's name blank. The lead was promising, but then agents learned that the van had been in the repair shop on the day of the kidnapping.
Okay, how long was he gone?
It was one more frustration in a difficult case. After more than a week, the FBI and U.S. Attorney James Tucker were no closer to finding Mrs. Heron.
A case like this is extremely difficult when you don't have an eyewitness to any one of several situations. We did not have an eyewitness as to the abduction itself. We did not have an eyewitness that Newton Alfred Wynn or any of the other people listed in the particular note had ever been in Mrs. Heron's company.
At the Jackson, Mississippi police station, investigators again met with the doctor who had seen a white van in the Herons' neighborhood.
Go through those and see if there's anybody you recognize.
They hoped he could recognize the driver in a photo lineup.
Short here.
The neighbor quickly picked out the photo of Alfred Wynn. He was certain it was Wynn he saw reading a map in a white van across the street from his house in mid-July, less than 2 weeks before Mrs. Heron's abduction. The other neighbor who had seen a similar van also identified Wynn as the driver. It was clear to agents that Alfred Wynn was connected to the kidnapping of Annie Laurie Heron, yet they didn't know how.
Thank you very much.
We thought, because of the positive identification, that Wynn was definitely somehow involved in the kidnapping. If not the actual perpetrator, if not the man who walked up to the door and actually grabbed Mrs. Heron, he certainly was directing or calling the shots.
Yep.
FBI agents kept Wynn under surveillance. They believed that he could lead them to the missing woman. But as the deadline in the ransom note approached, hopes of finding the frail Mrs. Heron dimmed further. The day after the deadline in a ransom note, FBI agents and local detectives briefed the husband of kidnapped Jackson, Mississippi socialite Annie Laurie Heron in preparation for a televised appeal for his ailing wife's return.
We'll be able to do it. Okay, thank you.
The note hadn't outlined specific steps to earn Mrs. Heron's release. FBI behavioral profilers hoped the press conference would prompt the kidnapper to contact Mr. Heron with instructions to get his wife back unharmed. With his son and daughter at his side, Robert Heron asked anyone with any information to come forward.
As a businessman,
he also spoke directly to the kidnapper, promising to follow any specific instructions. A week later, the plan seemed to have worked. On August 15th, 1988, Robert Heron spotted the familiar handwriting of his wife among his mail. The envelope was postmarked August 12th from Atlanta, Georgia. Investigators were careful not to destroy any evidence that might have been left on it. Mr. Heron believed the letter was in his wife's handwriting, too. FBI lab examiners later confirmed that it was. In the letter, Mrs. Heron begged her husband to do what the kidnappers wanted, or they would seal her up in a cellar with only a few jugs of water. Though the letter provided no instructions on how to comply. For Special Agent Patrick McGlennon, it did bring new encouragement just when all hope of recovering Mrs. Heron alive seemed lost.
When we received the August 15th letter, which was in Mrs. Heron's handwriting, it really lifted the spirits of everybody that was involved in the case. We felt reasonably sure that she was in good enough condition to write the letter, and we were going to get her back the same way.
The letter itself had been dated August 10th, 15 days after the abduction. Yet no one could be sure Mrs. Heron was alive on that date. It was unclear if she had written the letter on her own, or if the message was coerced, according to FBI Special Agent Tom Montgomery.
Certain words utilized on the letter, seal me up in the cellar with jugs of water. In talking to family members, we found out that those are not words that she would normally utilize. She would have used the word basement or bottles of water. So it is our belief that the letter was dictated to her.
If the letter had been dictated, both the message and the date could be false. Having to guess at what exactly he should do, Mr. Heron wrote checks to all the men listed in the original ransom note, according to U.S. Attorney James Tucker.
He had already instructed his people to make efforts to determine what financial situations he had had with each of the people that were listed in the original note. So he had some idea at that particular point about how much money had been involved with each of those people.
Mr. Heron settled on restitution, roughly equivalent to the amount the men had been ordered to pay in their franchise lawsuits. The total came to almost $1 million. Heron sent $145,000 to the prime suspect, Alfred Wynn. Enclosed with each check was a note requesting the safe return of his wife. The FBI instructed the Postal Service to deliver the envelopes the next day. Later, agents spoke with Wynn's paralegal and learned of the attorney's reaction to Mr. Heron's check.
When Mr. Wynn received his check in Tampa, Florida, he opened it, read the contents of the letter from Mr. Heron, turned to his paralegal and stated, "This is not what I wanted."
He told his paralegal that what he had wanted was to get his life back, the return of his confiscated car, jewelry, and other property. Wynn sent back the check with a note enclosed, saying he hoped Mrs. Heron would be returned safely. Agents now believed that Alfred Wynn had kidnapped Mrs. Heron for revenge against the photography company Heron once chaired, not for monetary gain. That meant it was less likely Mrs. Heron would ever be returned alive. Although some of the people receiving checks kept the money, most returned similar responses.
Some of the people that Mr. Heron sent these checks to sent the checks immediately back to him, sent letters or called on the telephone, expressing their regret to Mr. Heron that something like this could happen to his wife. They wanted nothing to do with the money, and they weren't going to benefit through his grief.
2.5 months passed without further word from Annie Heron's kidnapper. Considering her fragile health, chances were slim she would survive this long. In early November 1988, the case was featured on a national crime-solving television series. Agents around the country chased each of hundreds of leads called in. One call from a woman in Florida seemed especially promising. Although none of the names on the ransom note had been broadcast, she said that if Alfred Wynn were on the list, she had important information. The FBI learned that the Florida woman was a spiritual advisor, which did not initially bolster confidence among agents.
Special Agent Montgomery from the FBI. Have we spoke on the phone?
But after a brief interview, they realized she had a strong reputation in the law enforcement field, having often assisted police in the past.
I recognized some of the information that he...
The advisor told an agent she had first met N. Alfred Wynn 4 years earlier. In 1984, he had his first consultation, asking her advice about problems he had with the head of a photography company, the same company mentioned in the Heron ransom note.
She instructed him to pursue his problems through the court system and take legal means, and he told her that he had already done that, and it just didn't work.
That's the big problem. That is the biggest
Wynn
problem
said he
of my
wanted to
life.
kidnap the head of the company and hold him hostage until he got what he wanted. He had the perfect place to put the man and said that he was looking for someone to help him. He called her a month and a half later to ask if she would help.
Besides, I can go without risking losing these clients. Trying to get new clients.
She declined.
It's tough too, but
The advisor provided the FBI with records of her work with Wynn. Once assured agents would protect her, she agreed to become a cooperating witness and promised to contact Wynn to arrange a meeting.
Anything else, or if you want to talk to me, if you want to think of anything at all that might be helpful, please give me a
FBI technicians would wire her office for sound and video.
Thank you for coming.
Okay, my pleasure. Bye-bye.
Our plan was to draw Mr. Wynn into a face-to-face meeting with her and to have them discuss their prior discussions of this kidnapping of Mr. Heron, as well as any of the other things that would verify exactly what he had said to her during their prior meetings.
Alfred Wynn took the bait. The monitored meeting took place in early December 1988. FBI agents watched as Wynn approached the office. Agents hoped he would reveal the whereabouts of the missing woman. The advisor told Wynn she had seen the crime show on television and asked if he had kidnapped Annie Herron.
FBI one, can you hear him in there?
Wynn denied it, adding that he had decided not to abduct Robert Herron as he had previously discussed with the advisor. The recording corroborated the advisor's statement, but it didn't provide agents with the evidence needed to arrest Alfred Wynn. When Wynn left the office, FBI agents followed him.
We hoped a meeting between Mr. Wynn and the psychic would lead him to, at the very least, check on the location of Mrs. Herron's body or lead us to a co-conspirator.
But the suspect never went to visit a place where the body could have been kept. Weeks later, agents learned that Wynn owned a cabin in Florida's swampland, a perfect place to hide a body. Dead or alive, agents hoped they'd find Annie Herron there. They had no way of knowing if the house was booby-trapped or if someone was armed and waiting inside. 6 months after 73-year-old Annie Herron was kidnapped in Mississippi, FBI agents hoped to find her in a remote Florida cabin owned by prime suspect Alfred Wynn. The message from the kidnapper had threatened that the elderly woman would be sealed alive in a cellar. But agents found no cellar. The police was empty of anything related to the kidnapping. FBI Special Agent Patrick McGlennon and other investigators continued searching for the kidnapped woman nearby.
We began to look in dry cisterns, some swamp area adjacent to those properties, the outbuildings, screened porches, whatever structures existed. We found no sign of Mrs. Herron, and no sign that anybody had ever stayed there for any length of time. Certainly no cellars. There were no cellars in that section of Florida.
Annie Herron was still missing and presumed dead. Then, in late July of 1989, Alfred Wynn sent a filing cabinet to the IRS, challenging them to find disputed financial documents.
All right, guys, we got the filing cabinet we've been waiting on Wynn from the IRS.
But he failed to check the cabinet thoroughly, and his arrogance would bring him down.
When, we believe, sent those thousands of documents to Internal Revenue Service as part of an effort to intimidate them into leaving him alone, that was a pattern that the agents discovered in regard to Wynn conduct in a number of situations. His arrogance was demonstrated in his efforts to overpower whoever he was involved with at any particular point.
When they found letters regarding a kidnapping and murder plot, IRS agents called the FBI. The documents outlined how Wynn and a former girlfriend had been planning to kidnap and kill the woman's husband. According to FBI Special Agent Tom Montgomery, the similarities to Annie Herron's abduction were obvious.
They mentioned utilizing an old typewriter to type a communication, and the first ransom note for Annie Laurie Herron was typed on an old 1920s vintage typewriter. They also mentioned detailed maps, surveillance of the area. They also mentioned that it was actually Wynn that was going to do the crime, and the female was just going to help him and obtain what he needed.
FBI agents tracked down Wynn's ex-girlfriend at the community college where she worked. They needed to question her about the plot outlined in the letters. At first, she claimed she knew nothing about the plot. But when reminded that interfering with an investigation was itself a crime, she decided to cooperate.
The last time you saw him was a few years ago?
She said the plot to kill her husband was Wynn's idea.
Maybe a year, maybe 6
When she
months
realized he
ago,
was
a little
serious,
more.
she had broken up with Wynn.
6 months ago. Mailed it from Miami.
Agents asked if she had had any contact with him since then. She said that a year earlier, in early August 1988, Wynn had asked her to meet him at a motel in DeLand, Florida. It was just days after Annie Herron had been kidnapped. Wynn acted paranoid, silently handing her a note that asked if her car was bugged, if she'd been followed. When he was convinced it was safe, he began talking.
What's this all about?
Wynn asked her to mail a letter for him, offering her $500 plus travel expenses.
First of all, did I touch it?
She agreed, and he paid her half in advance, $250.
They're in there. Very, very important.
Wynn handed her an envelope wrapped in a gray linen napkin. Then he gave her very specific instructions. She was not to touch the envelope or even look at the address. Wynn ordered her to mail it from Atlanta, buy the airline tickets under a false name, and fly into and out of 2 different airports. He instructed her to change her appearance before the trip. She complied, changing her clothes, jewelry, and hair in the women's restroom at the airport. Once in Atlanta, she was to mail the envelope precisely on August 11th. But the woman told agents it was late in the day when she made it to a mailbox. At the last moment, she said she couldn't resist a glance at the address. The letter, allegedly sent by Annie Laurie Herron, was postmarked on August 12th from Atlanta.
Have you seen this
Agents
photograph
showed the
before?
woman a photo of the envelope Robert Herron had received. She immediately recognized the distinctive handwriting. It was the envelope she had mailed.
Do you have on this? If I could clarify.
She said that she had thrown away the napkin used to carry the envelope on a rural road.
Thank you.
She offered to take them there once she finished work. That evening, she brought the agents to the area. Investigators knew there was little chance they would find the napkin on the roadside after more than a year, but they looked anyway. They needed it to corroborate her story. Against all odds, they found it. But they wanted an admission in Alfred Wynn's own words. With a solid cooperating witness, agents were getting closer to arresting Wynn. At the FBI's request, Wynn's ex-girlfriend agreed to be wired for an audio tape meeting between herself and Wynn.
We had hoped that Mr. Wynn would discuss facets of the crime, that he would tell her what she had accomplished by sending the letter to the Herron residence, that he would thank her for her help, that he would pay her.
The woman called Wynn and set up a meeting. Agents had instructed her to try to draw Wynn out about the trip to Atlanta.
Fine, but you owe me some.
As hoped,
Yep, that's what I'm
Wynn
here
gave
for.
his ex-girlfriend the $250 he still owed her for mailing the envelope. Wynn refused to talk in detail about his plan, and he never mentioned Annie Laurie Herron.
All right, you did me a favor, all right?
He seemed to have stonewalled investigators again. Convinced he was involved and desperate to find Mrs. Herron, the FBI knew they had to arrest Wynn soon. On March 11th, 1989, the FBI was ready to arrest suspected kidnapper Alfred Wynn. They set up a second meeting with Wynn's former girlfriend who had begun cooperating with authorities. The ex-girlfriend had been wired so agents could record the conversation. They hoped Wynn would say something incriminating about the kidnapping of Annie Herron, so they could charge him and recover Mrs. Herron or her body. FBI Special Agent Tom Montgomery had coached the informant on how to deal with Wynn in this crucial second meeting.
We had instructed her to become more aggressive in this meeting and to basically indicate to him that she was aware that she was involved in a criminal act, that she'd been watching television, and that she now realized that the letter that she mailed may in fact be involved in the kidnapping, may have been a second ransom note, hoping to elicit from him something to incriminate him further.
Agents watched and listened as the woman pushed Wynn about the Herron kidnapping. The suspect soon became defensive and left the car without admitting any knowledge of the crime.
Pull it out. Let's go, let's go, let's go.
Agents knew it was time to make their move. The element of surprise is critical to a safe arrest. Alfred Wynn was charged with conspiracy to kidnap, mailing a threatening communication, and perjury for testifying in front of a grand jury that he wasn't involved in the kidnapping. But agents still had no solid proof that he or an accomplice had in fact abducted Annie Herron. In Wynn's car, agents discovered several maps of Mississippi, one with a Jackson exit marked on it in pen and notes in the margin. Agents thought these might indicate where Mrs. Herron's body had been placed, but extensive searches yielded nothing. Securing a warrant, Florida FBI agents searched Wynn's office. They needed physical evidence to prove Wynn was involved in the abduction of Annie Laurie Herron. Their hopes rose when they spotted a vintage typewriter. Special Agent McGlennon recalled that FBI examiners had determined the ransom note was typed on a 1920s-era Royal typewriter, the exact model recovered from Wynn's office.
This seemed to be a very significant break. In my mind, this was the typewriter upon which Wynn typed the initial demand note that was left in the Herron's home. We sent it to the lab, fully expecting them to come back with a report saying, this is the exact typewriter that composed that letter.
The FBI lab determined that the typewriter found in Wynn's office was not the one used to type the ransom note. Agents believed Wynn had planted a different typewriter to bring doubt to later prosecution. They had also found a business card for a van rental company in Wynn's office.
How you doing?
The company owner said Alfred Wynn had rented white vans 3 times.
I'm the manager. Okay.
Each time he had driven more than 500 miles, just 100 miles more than the round trip to the Herron's residence.
Yes, I do, but I don't have a computer.
The rental times did not coincide with the date of the abduction, but one did match the date when Alfred Wynn was sighted in the Herron's neighborhood. U.S. Attorney James Tucker had little evidence to prove his case. He believed that Wynn and his paralegal were lying about the suspect being with a prostitute on the day of the kidnapping.
We went back and confronted the paralegal with this false alibi. The agents and I had a heart-to-heart talk with him, at which he decided that he better tell us that all that was a lie, and that Mr. Wynn had in fact been out of his law offices and out of pocket during the entire time that the abduction occurred, which would have been the crucial dates, the 24th through about the 28th.
This would help prove perjury, but it wasn't enough to charge Wynn with the crime they were certain he had committed, the kidnapping and murder of Annie Laurie Herron. The federal trial for conspiracy to kidnap began in Mississippi on January 29, 1990.
Throughout the investigation and the 2-week trial, which occurred in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, Wynn professed his innocence. But at the conclusion, a jury of his peers found him guilty for the crimes for which he was charged.
N. Alfred Wynn received the maximum sentence allowed. 19 years and 7 months for conspiracy to commit kidnapping. He has no chance of parole from the federal prison in Coleman, Florida.
We have never to this day resolved where Mrs. Heron is now, and the family deserves to know that. In fact, as far as this office is concerned, we still carry this as an open matter, and will continue to do so until such time as somebody steps forward and helps us out with locating where Mrs. Heron is. Family deserves it.
Mr. Robert Heron died of a heart attack on November 28, 1990. In May of 1991, Mrs. Annie Laurie Heron was declared dead to allow the settlement of the couple's estate. The Heron family still hopes to someday learn what happened to their mother, to begin to heal their pain, and to finally lay her to rest. A teenage immigrant came to the United States to realize her dream of becoming a doctor. But a tragic twist of fate intervened when she found herself an innocent victim of the drug trade. Kidnapped and held captive, she survived for days against all odds. Authorities arrested her captors, but they refused to reveal her whereabouts. The FBI and local police raced against time, determined to save the teenager's life.
When a young woman was grabbed from her Texas home, the police raced to find her abductors. On the face of it, the kidnapping seemed like the random act of desperate men. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Before the FBI could find her, they first had to find a motive. Their investigation revealed a complex story of betrayal and revenge. At its center stood an innocent 16-year-old who found herself in the clutches of killers.
September 24th, 1994, Arlington, Texas. It was a Saturday night, and 16-year-old Lisa Rene was home studying. She wanted to make the most of her first semester in an American high school. She hoped to someday return to the Virgin Islands as a surgeon.
Who is it?
At 8 p.m., her concentration was suddenly shattered. Somehow, she knew not to answer the door. Instead, she called her sister Pearl.
What do you want?
Pearl told Lisa to call 911. She promised to come right home.
Arlington 911, what are you reporting? Who do they say that they're looking for?
Lisa said men were trying to break into her house. Men who claimed to be FBI agents.
You have the wrong house. I'm sorry. Oh, they're the FBI. They're the FBI. They said that. What's going on?
The dispatcher heard the phone drop.
What's going on? Ma'am.
Then there was silence. Lisa never came back on the line. As Arlington, Texas police responded to the 911 call, Lisa disappeared into the night. The police had no way of knowing they were about to pass her on the street. or that a 16-year-old girl was now in mortal danger. Police were on the scene with Lisa's sister Pearl when Detective John Stanton arrived. As a veteran of the Arlington Police Force, he would lead the investigation.
From the initial 911 call, it sounded like a very serious kidnapping. It sounded to the 911 call takers that there was some foul play and some actual violence involved.
The detective needed to know everything, and quickly. The early hours of a kidnapping case are crucial. Pearl told the officers all she knew. She was at work when her sister Lisa called to say some men were trying to break into the apartment. She told Lisa to call 911, then hurried home. But she was too late. She found the sliding glass door smashed and Lisa gone.
For a 16-year-old to be physically dragged from a residence in Arlington is just, it's really kind of unspeakable.
Okay, now whose room is this?
Pearl told the detectives that her brothers, Neil and Stanfield, were also staying with her. They had been evicted from their own apartment for allegedly selling drugs. Pearl explained that her family was from the U.S. Virgin Islands. She and her brothers had come to America first. Lisa had joined them in time to start school. She was a straight-A student. Investigators processed the apartment, hoping to find a clue as to the abductors' identities. They found no prints far into the apartment. Perhaps the abductors were known to the family. The detective asked to talk to Pearl's brothers, but they were on their way back from a Houston music festival. The detective told Pearl to get them on the cell phone. They were 50 miles from the apartment when Detective Stanton reached them.
I understand what you're saying. When I spoke to the brothers, I spoke with Stanfield initially. Stanfield told me that they don't know of anyone who would have wanted to abduct their sister. They owed no one money, that this was not about any sort of drug business. They weren't involved in anything involving drugs.
All right.
As much as Pearl Rene tried to help, the detective believed her brothers had the answers he was looking for. But without their help, he would have to identify Lisa's captors the hard way. As precious minutes slipped by, forensic technicians combed the apartment for additional clues. They collected glass from the broken sliding door and hair and fiber samples. They dusted for fingerprints, only to conclude that the kidnappers had worn gloves. Even this small detail worried detectives. It suggested Lisa Rene was in the hands of experienced criminals. If Detective Stanton ever hoped to find Lisa alive, he knew he needed all the help he could get.
You have to use the resources available to you, and that includes additional manpower, the use of the FBI. You have to use everything that you have as a resource.
Special agents from the FBI's Fort Worth resident agency joined detectives at the scene. Special Agent Kenneth Persano was concerned that the kidnappers had identified themselves as FBI agents.
As it turned out, there was no FBI agent there on the scene or any other joint investigation ongoing in that neighborhood.
Neighbors reported seeing 4 young African-American men hanging around the apartment complex prior to the abduction. They were wearing camouflage clothing and driving a champagne-colored Cadillac.
The atmosphere at the crime scene was tense. Lisa Rene's sister was very distraught that she wasn't there for her sister, and also residents in the complex were disturbed that a young lady could be abducted from an apartment complex so readily.
The fact that Lisa Rene was a minor and that her abductors had impersonated federal agents gave the FBI jurisdiction over the case. They would work in conjunction with local law enforcement.
Homicide, Stanton.
Detective Stanton worked through the night and into the morning.
Yeah, what's going on?
In the early hours of September 25th, he received a call from Lisa's brothers. They had found the champagne-colored Cadillac in nearby Irving, the same one residents had described at the complex.
It was an unusual tip. For the brothers to have just barely gotten into Arlington, to have had them drive mysteriously to a residence in Irving, Texas, which is some distance from Arlington, and in that same bit of circumstance, find a Cadillac fitting that general description, we thought was very curious.
They reported that the Cadillac was parked in front of a residence. If Lisa's brothers knew something more about their sister's abduction, they weren't telling police. Detective Stanton and Special Agent Bersano rushed to the residence in Irving. Irving police were already there. The sooner they found out where Lisa was being held, the better their chance of finding her alive. As Lisa's brothers had said, the Cadillac was parked out front.
I got a cold hood.
We touched the vehicle to see if the vehicle had been moved or had been in operation previously from the heat on the hood. We also looked inside the vehicle with our flashlights to see if there were any items that may have been left by the victim.
A woman answered the door.
We explained why we were there, that we were from the Arlington Police Department, from the FBI. We'd like to talk to her about the abduction of a young 16-year-old girl. We asked if we may just look around her home to see if the young lady that was abducted was in there.
The woman said she and her husband owned the Cadillac, but he wasn't home since he worked the night shift. She said she hadn't seen anyone who matched the description of the suspects. But she let investigators take a quick look around. They began in a child's room where her son was asleep. Nothing seemed suspicious. In another room, they awakened a woman sleeping in a double bed.
It's 4 o'clock in the morning.
It appeared she was alone.
Talked to Sandra. She told us we would look around. We're looking for somebody. Just sit tight.
In the hallway, investigators noticed stairs to an attic. One of the Irving officers climbed up and looked around.
There's a light up here.
He checked amidst the boxes and other items, but saw no one there.
I don't see anything up here.
We didn't have a real just cause to do an intensive search of the residence. We searched for, obviously, any sign that someone had been kidnapped, in places where someone could secrete a human body, just to be on the safe side.
Investigators left, still suspicious. But without a warrant, they were unable to do a more thorough search. Investigators turned their attention back to Lisa's brothers, Neil and Stanfield.
We felt that it was drug-related, and we told Neil and Stanfield that we're not interested in their current legal problems, but that we feel like Lisa's life may be at stake, and that we need to have all the information that they can provide us to help get their sister back.
The day after the kidnapping, investigators again interviewed Neil and Stanfield. Despite their pending drug charges, Lisa's brothers finally came clean. They described a bogus drug deal that they'd taken part in a few days before.
What's up, man?
The brothers said that they had met with 2 men, but claimed they only knew the one named Steve.
9 pounds, right? Yeah.
Steve and his partner had given them $5,000 to score 9 pounds of marijuana.
How long will it take?
Neil and Stanfield promised they would return in an hour with the drugs, but they never did.
Right?
They now admitted they had never intended to deliver the marijuana. They just needed the money for attorney's fees because of their pending drug charges. Lisa's brothers said they didn't know how to contact Steve, but they knew someone who did. And that was all the brothers would say. The man who knew Steve was an inmate serving an 8-year sentence at the Tarrant County Jail. He revealed that Steve's full name was Stephen Beckley, a 19-year-old who worked detailing cars at a dealership in Irving, Texas.
West Wing Auto Shop, where's that at?
Investigators ran a computer check on Beckley. He had no outstanding warrants and no criminal history. As investigators continued to work the case, Lisa's sister, Pearl, did all she could to help. She hung up missing persons flyers and contacted local media, hoping someone might have seen Lisa. But the chance of finding her sister alive grew dimmer with each passing day. On September 24th, 1994, 16-year-old Lisa Rene was kidnapped from her Arlington, Texas apartment.
Who are you? I'm the FBI. Oh, they're the FBI. Open the door. No, we talk. They're the FBI. They said they're the FBI, ma'am. No! Ma'am? What's going on? Ma'am?
Just over 2 days had passed since Lisa's desperate call for help. Local police and the FBI were no closer to finding the missing girl. With time running out, the Arlington Police Department asked the public for help. Detective Stanton recalls the response was tremendous.
It was truly something that brought out the public and the public's fears about being abducted out of your own residence. It's sort of something that you're not expecting in a community like Arlington. It's not something that's ordinary. This doesn't happen here, I would say, ever in a town like ours.
On September 27th, the Arlington police detective received an unexpected visitor. He was the owner of the Irving, Texas home that police had searched in connection with a champagne-colored Cadillac. He was at work during the search, but had since heard the news of Lisa's disappearance and believed he had information that might be helpful. He said that the day before the kidnapping, he threw a barbecue since his wife's brothers were staying with him for a few days. The oldest brother, Orlando Hall, was involved with drugs. His younger brother, Demetrius Hall, shared the same interest. Their friend, Stephen Beckley, joined them.
When the husband told us that the Hall brothers were dressed in camouflage clothing, it made him know that after having heard the news stories, his brothers-in-law could very well be connected to the kidnapping case.
Something else had sparked the man's suspicions. One of his neighbors said she saw several young men drive up to the house in his Cadillac. At that time, he and his wife were out for dinner using a different car. But the Cadillac's keys were kept in the hall, so it was possible his wife's brothers had borrowed it. The man said he'd never trusted the Hall brothers.
Come here, you.
Both had served time in Arkansas on drug charges.
Come here, son. Come here. Come here.
And by visiting their sister in Irving, Texas, they were in violation of their parole.
You ain't like that. Put it out. Whatever's right.
The man sensed they were up to something new, but didn't know what. He added that the Hall brothers were no longer staying at his house. On the night of the kidnapping, only Orlando had slept in the house, but he flew back to Arkansas early the next morning, planning to stay with friends in the town of El Dorado. The detective suspected Orlando had probably joined the others there. He contacted the El Dorado, Arkansas police. Investigators discovered that 19-year-old Demetrius Hall was on parole for possession of cocaine with intent to distribute. His older brother, Orlando Hall, was on parole for the same offense. His record also included arrests for aggravated assault and carrying a weapon.
When I spoke to the people in El Dorado, they were aware of the Hall family. In fact, they were providing to me information about the Hall brothers before I could even give them the information about the Hall brothers. They were well known to law enforcement in the community.
Later that day, investigators obtained a warrant to more thoroughly search the Irving, Texas home where the Hall brothers had been staying. They scoured the house for hair, fibers, blood, fingerprints, and anything else that might be connected to the crime. FBI Special Agent Garrett Floyd remembers their most significant discovery.
In the children's room, we found a souvenir miniature baseball bat. When you pick up an item and you can see glass embedded in it, and you know that the sliding pane window was glass, then you make a decision on the spot, and you believe that evidence is a part of the crime scene.
Lab tests would determine whether his hunch was correct. In a storage container found in a bedroom closet, investigators discovered a green knit shirt with insulation fibers on it. They bagged it for further analysis. They also took samples of insulation fibers from the attic. Lab tests would later reveal that they matched the fibers on the shirt. A pair of camouflage pants was also found in the attic. Forensic technicians processed the champagne-colored Cadillac at the police impound lot. They found no fingerprints relevant to the case. They did discover a few small glass fragments inside the car, possibly from Lisa's sliding glass door. They sent the fragments to the lab for analysis. As they waited for the results, agents obtained arrest warrants for the Hall brothers and their friend Stephen Beckley, since they already had enough to establish probable cause. But they still hadn't found Lisa Rene. Agent Floyd continued to work around the clock, knowing that with each hour, they were less likely to find her alive.
We were very motivated in solving this case, in as much that we knew that time was critical. All of our efforts were focused on the recovery of the victim.
Investigators hoped they could pick up Lisa's trail, a trail that ended with broken glass. Technicians compared glass fragments from the car and those embedded in the baseball bat to shards collected from Lisa's home. At the FBI laboratory in Washington, D.C., Supervisory Special Agent and Forensic Examiner Bruce Hall attempted to confirm that all the glass had come from the same sliding glass door. Technicians examined the glass embedded in the baseball bat. They tested the composition of the glass. It was consistent with the glass collected at Lisa's apartment. To confirm their results, they also tested its refractive index, the degree to which light bends as it passes through the sample.
After characterizing the glass recovered from the crime scene and characterizing the glass recovered from the baseball bat, I found that the glass on the baseball bat had the same refractive index and same composition as the glass at the crime scene. That led me to the conclusion that the glass on the baseball bat had originated from the crime scene.
The glass found in the Cadillac did not match. It was determined to have come from a window previously broken on the car. At the request of the FBI and Arlington, Texas police, El Dorado, Arkansas detectives tracked down the fugitives. They found 19-year-old Demetrius Hall at his father's house in El Dorado. He surrendered peacefully and was taken to the El Dorado jail. But he refused to say anything about Lisa's whereabouts. The search of the house revealed nothing. What investigators still didn't know was where Lisa was and whether she was dead or alive. 4.5 days after 16-year-old Lisa Rene was kidnapped from her sister's apartment in Arlington, Texas, investigators had tracked two abductors to El Dorado, Arkansas. One of the three suspects, Demetrius Hall, was in custody. Investigators continued to search for his older brother, Orlando, and a third man named Stephen Beckley. That afternoon, police found Stephen Beckley at a friend's house. The officers didn't even have to knock. Beckley came out and gave himself up. FBI agents and detectives from Arlington flew to El Dorado to interview the suspects. Stephen Beckley was initially uncooperative. He refused to say where Lisa Rene was or whether she was still alive.
I'm losing my patience with you right now.
Special Agent Garrett Floyd refused to give up.
Mr. Beckley advised that he did not know a whole lot of information concerning what was going on. After about an hour of talking to him, he looked at me and we developed somewhat of a relationship and we started to talk.
Beckley said that he and his friends had called in a fourth man named Bruce Webster to help them exact their revenge on Lisa Rene's brothers. Webster was a convicted felon and had a violent reputation as a hitman. Their plan was to douse Lisa Rene's brothers in gasoline and ignite it if they didn't turn over the drugs or the money as they had promised. When the men arrived at Lisa Rene's apartment, her brothers were not home. Unwilling to leave empty-handed, they kidnapped her instead. Beckley said that he and the other three took Lisa to the house in Irving, Texas, where Demetrius and Orlando were staying. They transferred the teenage girl from the Cadillac to Beckley's Ford Escort.
Get off the car!
Stephen Beckley, Bruce Webster, and 19-year-old Demetrius Hall drove her to Arkansas. Orlando Hall stayed behind and hid in his sister's attic. Detective Stanton was frustrated. Police had been within a few feet of Orlando Hall and missed him.
It wasn't until later that we learned, after we had taken some people into custody, that Orlando had been indeed hiding in the attic insulation while we were downstairs talking to the lady of the house.
Beckley said that during the 4-hour drive to Arkansas, he and the other two had taken turns raping Lisa Rene. When they arrived in Arkansas that night, Webster booked a motel room in Pine Bluff. Lisa was kept bound and gagged in the bathroom.
I'm trying to find her.
Agents pushed Beckley to tell them if the girl was still alive and where she was. Every minute counted if they were to save her life. But Beckley wouldn't say. He claimed he was afraid to talk as long as Bruce Webster was on the loose.
In his mind, he thought, believed, knew that Bruce Webster would kill him or anyone else if they ever divulged the information of what had occurred to Lisa Rene. That's the fear that Bruce Webster had instilled in the individuals as part of his kidnapping.
If I say a word...
Beckley did tell investigators where to look for Webster. The ex-convict might still be at the motel in Pine Bluff where they had held Lisa Rene 4 days ago. Investigators headed to the motel to confront a man Beckley had described as a violent hitman. Pine Bluff was 90 miles from El Dorado. Agents spoke with the manager to confirm Beckley's story. They hoped they would find Webster there, as well as Lisa Rene.
Upon interviewing the innkeeper, we were able to determine that Bruce Webster had registered at that inn, and that during the time he was registering, a young lady attempted to get out of the car, and that Bruce turned to the other occupants in the car and says, "Put the bitch back in the car." Bruce Webster and his companions then drove to the back of the property and went into the room.
The manager also remembered seeing 2 other black males in the car, but she couldn't make out their faces.
Nobody said anything last
She
night.
showed
I mean,
investigators the registration log for September 25th. Webster had been in room 513. The room was rented and cleaned several times after the men checked out. Chances of finding any useful evidence were slim. An FBI emergency response team was called in. The agent and detective continued to interview Beckley. They asked him for details of what went on in the room, hoping he would break down and tell them where Lisa was now.
Once we got Mr. Beckley to this Pine Bluff motel, the urgency was there in that we thought that she was still alive because Mr. Beckley assured us the last time he saw her, she was alive and she was at this inn.
Okay. Beckley told police that the men had raped Lisa repeatedly in the bathroom. Otherwise, they had kept her hooded with a paper bag over her head. During their second night at the motel, the kidnappers were nearly discovered. A security guard knocked at the door.
The innkeeper asked that their on-residence security guard who lived there check the room to see if everything was all right. The security guard did check the room and did not see Lisa Rene within the room. Stephen Beckley advised that had he seen her, that they were going to kill the security guard.
Beckley and the others were afraid that the guard might return. The motel was no longer a safe place to hide. As the kidnapper told his story, forensic technicians worked to confirm that Lisa had in fact been in the room. But after hours of painstaking work, they still had no evidence that Lisa had been there or that she was still alive. 6 days after 16-year-old Lisa Rene was kidnapped from her Arlington, Texas apartment, the FBI was no closer to finding her or 2 remaining suspects. Although investigators had found no evidence to indicate that Lisa had been in a Pine Bluff motel room, confessed kidnapper Stephen Beckley assured them she had. Forensic technician Joel Stevenson of the Arlington, Texas Police Department was determined to find something that would corroborate Beckley's story.
We went in knowing that possibly sexual assaults had occurred in that motel room, multiple sexual assaults. We went into the motel room looking for body fluids that may tie the suspects to the motel room or Lisa to the motel room.
If Lisa and her kidnappers had left behind any evidence, it appeared to have been destroyed by the motel's housekeepers. The technicians didn't give up. They continued their meticulous search for hairs, fibers, and fingerprints. Finally, their persistence paid off.
It wasn't until we got into the bathroom and the wall behind the toilet is where we located the palm prints and fingerprints that were ultimately identified as belonging to Lisa Rene. So the palm print itself, placing Lisa with them in that same motel room, was very important. It was a very critical piece of putting her with them.
Investigators now had evidence that Lisa was alive 4 days earlier, the day Beckley and the others had checked in. As agents drove the kidnapper 90 miles back to the El Dorado jail, they pressed Beckley for more details. He admitted that after Orlando Hall had joined them in Pine Bluff, they decided to move Lisa to another motel nearby in order to avoid a second visit by the security guard. After a couple of days in that motel, the men grew increasingly concerned about getting caught. They came up with a plan to dispose of the girl. Demetrius Hall stayed behind to wipe the room clean, while the other three loaded her into Webster's car and headed for a rural area. Beckley told investigators that Bruce Webster and Orlando Hall had dug a grave in a nature preserve near the motel. They took Lisa there to kill her. But in the dark, overgrown park, the three men couldn't find the burial site. After an hour, they took her back to the motel. The next morning, they searched for the gravesite again. While forensic technicians scoured the second motel room for clues, investigators pressured Beckley to tell them what happened next. Special Agent Garrett Floyd recalls that Beckley refused, still afraid that Webster might seek retribution.
We were pressed for time because the clock was still ticking. We were hoping against hope that she was still alive. And so with this in mind, agents as well as police officers who had not slept in 2 or 3 days were up searching, looking, hoping that she was still alive.
Then, investigators got the call they'd been hoping for. The FBI emergency response team, working at the second motel, had spotted Bruce Webster pull up in his car. The suspected kidnapper had returned to the motel with a young woman, but she was not Lisa Rene. A brief interview revealed she was not connected to the crime in any way.
You're not in any trouble. It's going to be okay, okay? Just let me call him.
He had driven up into the parking lot. Our officers and the FBI agents confronted him. He identified himself as Bruce Webster, gave date of birth information. He was carrying a small baggie of what appeared to be marijuana in his pocket. He was asked if we could search his vehicle. He allowed the officers to search his vehicle that he'd driven up in.
Inside the vehicle, agents found two handguns. They charged Webster with possession of the guns and the marijuana and took him to the Garland County Jail in Hot Springs, Arkansas. The car was processed for other evidence. They found no trace of the missing girl.
And when they radioed us and told us he was in custody, we, myself, and Detective Ford went back and interviewed Bruce Webster. He stated that he didn't know anything. He hadn't done anything wrong. He was simply coming back to his motel room.
As Agent Floyd continued to pressure Webster for answers, the last of the fugitives, Orlando Hall, turned himself in.
Orlando Hall had apparently seen the news that these arrests had been made, found out, of course, that his brother had been taken into custody. He surrendered to the Pine Bluff Police Department.
With all 4 suspects now in custody, agents hoped that one of them would reveal where investigators could find Lisa Rene. The interview with Bruce Webster, the man who had been hired to do the killing, continued into the night, but he said little. Agent Floyd believed Webster had the answers they were looking for.
Basically, the only information Mr. Webster provided was his name, the fact that he hadn't done anything, and the fact that he wanted to go to sleep. To him, it was nothing. She was nothing.
Agents' hope of finding Lisa alive was fading. They needed to get one of the suspects to talk, and they needed to do it fast. Six days after a young woman was abducted from her Arlington, Texas apartment, investigators pressed her suspected kidnappers for information.
Got here, a little party took, huh?
Until now, alleged hitman Bruce Webster had stonewalled investigators. But Special Agent Garrett Floyd's persistence eventually paid off.
You can remember nothing else?
Webster finally admitted that Lisa was dead.
It felt like a tremendous sledgehammer falling on you. We had tracked this young lady from Arlington, Texas to Pine Bluff, Arkansas, over 200 miles, with the one hope of finding her alive. And we did not. It was as if all of the wind and all of the energy had gone out of us.
Webster picked up the story where his accomplice Stephen Beckley left off. When they returned to the park with Lisa, they located the grave they had dug the day before. Detective John Stanton's fears had been realized.
The reality of it set in at that point that we were not going to find her alive. We were not going to be able to save her. We were going to be too late.
Stand by the car. Watch
Webster said that only two of his accomplices, Orlando Hall and Stephen Beckley, took Lisa back to the park. The fourth kidnapper, Demetrius Hall, had stayed behind to clean the motel room and wipe away fingerprints. The suspected hitman claimed he wasn't actually with the others when they killed the girl. Webster said he returned to the car to act as the lookout. From the car, the grave was too far away to have seen the murder. Now that Webster was safely in custody, the agents decided to see if Beckley would corroborate his story. Agent Floyd felt that Beckley knew far more than he had said.
And he looked at me, he said, "You know I didn't tell you everything. You know I've lied." And I said, "Yes, I know you did not tell me everything. You didn't lie, but you didn't tell me everything." And he said, "You're right." So then Stephen Beckley started crying. And Stephen Beckley told me she was dead, that she was buried in these woods, and that we needed to go get her. And I said, "We will go get her. Let's get your story on paper, and we will go and find her."
Crazy, man. He's a hitman.
Beckley said that despite Bruce Webster's story, the hitmen had indeed been involved in the killing.
He told us a story that the grave was 6 foot deep, and that when she went to the grave, when she, Bruce Webster, Orlando Hall, and he, Stephen Beckley, arrived at the grave, that she saw the grave, and that she started to run in the effort to get away. And that they struck at her with a shovel and placed a mark in this tree. That he, Beckley, became concerned and was afraid and ran back up to the street to check to see if the way was clear, as he was instructed to by Bruce Webster. By the time he came back, they were burying her.
What you asked for?
Beckley told investigators that the men then met Demetrius back at the motel, showered, and left. They gave their dirty clothes to Webster, who burned them in the park, along with Lisa's blood-stained outfit. Webster stayed in Pine Bluff with Orlando Hall, while the other two returned to El Dorado. The agent re-interviewed Webster, hoping Beckley's confession would give him some leverage. The agent told him that Beckley had placed him at the murder scene and named the park where the body was buried.
He stated that he didn't know anything about anything. The last thing that I told him was, "Everyone else has told me what has occurred. Why won't you?" And he said, "They're family, aren't they?" I said, "Yep, the family has turned on you." He said, "Open that book. Let me tell you what happened."
The hitman now confessed that he was, in fact, at the murder scene. He admitted that he had dug the grave, and he offered to show it to the agent.
So in the middle of the night, we drove back to Pine Bluff and told him I need as many flashlights and officers and agents available, that we were going to find her tonight.
Webster showed investigators the area of the park where the body was buried. They searched for evidence to corroborate the suspect's stories. By morning, they found the gravesite. They began to process the area and exhume the body. The site was as the hitman had described it, right down to a damaged tree near the grave.
And we removed a section of that tree because it was evidence that the shovel that they were hitting her with had actually missed on one of their swings and hit the tree. So we used that tree as a part of the evidence.
Unearthing the body was a time-consuming and heartbreaking process. Besides digging, investigators sifted through leaves and dirt, searching for anything that might help tie the suspects to the crime. Joel Stevenson of the Arlington, Texas Police recalls the moment when their hard work finally paid off.
We made contact with Lisa's body approximately 2 feet down from the surface, the outer surface of the dirt, and then started uncovering her and really excavating around the body from that point on down to the 4 feet level. This lasted for about 5.5 hours. It took us to fully extract her from the gravesite.
When they reached the dead woman's body, it was an emotional moment for investigators who wanted so desperately to save Lisa Rene.
During the time we were exhuming her body, one of the agents on the evidence response team accidentally scrapes her knee. The agent breaks down. And I break down. Because we know now that she's dead. This week that we have spent trying to locate her has resulted in the recovery of her, but not the recovery of her in that she was not alive.
The coroner removed Lisa's body to the Arkansas State Lab in Little Rock, where an autopsy was performed. She had ligature marks on her arms, defensive wounds on her hands, bruises over much of her body, and deep lacerations to the back of her head. But the cause of death was determined to be suffocation, coupled with blunt force trauma to the head. The coroner believed Lisa's attackers knocked her unconscious with a shovel and then buried her alive.
When you find out that you were that close to possibly saving this kidnapped victim from her demise, as it turned out, it hurts in that you wish you could kind of go back in time and do something different than you did. But under the conditions that we had and the information we had to work with, we felt like we did as good as we could. Unfortunately, it wasn't good enough to save Lisa.
The 4 kidnappers were tried soon after her body was found. Demetrius Hall became a witness for the state and accepted a plea bargain of 25 years. Stephen Beckley did the same and got 30 years. Orlando Hall received the death penalty for interstate kidnapping resulting in death. A few months later, Bruce Webster received the same sentence. Both were sent to death row at the U.S. Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. The trials were little consolation to Lisa's sister Pearl, who could barely absorb the fact that the bright teenager would never realize her dream of becoming a surgeon.
I thought I'd feel better, but I really don't.
because I mean, it's not gonna bring her back. The only thing that's gonna make it better is Lisa was here today, and she's not coming back.
For Arlington Police Detective John Stanton, Lisa Rene's murder had disturbing implications.
It just solidified the fact that things can happen to people who are completely and totally unrelated to criminal activities. No one is exempt from the possibility that, for no real reason of their own, they get put in a position where their life is in jeopardy. And Lisa Rene is a prime example of someone that, in the years that I've been doing this, she is actually probably the most innocent victim that I've ever worked a case on. And it's something that we'd all need to remember, that even if you're an innocent victim, you can still be a victim.
For Special Agent Garrett Floyd and investigators alike, the case was personal.
I have a daughter who's approximately the same age as Lisa Rene. And to believe that someone could take a child, a young lady, and do the things that they did to her and then kill her without any respect for life takes that father image in me to a different level. Because we love our children, and we know that we have to take care and keep them out of harm's way. And on a Saturday night, if my daughter's doing homework and I happen to run to the store, they could break in my house and take my daughter and do the same thing.